This meeting of the Pittsboro Board of Commissioners for Monday, March 12, 2018, and we'll begin with a moment of silence. Thank you. Would you lead our pledge, Jay Farrell?
Certainly. Would everyone rise for the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
We have our agenda before us. It consists of 8 items, and then I'll ask later for a motion on the regular agenda. Are there any changes or modifications to the consent agenda?
I'd like it if we could move item 3 to new business.
Item 3 will be the first item then of new business.
And I'd like to do the same with number 2, so if we can put that as item 2, I guess, new business.
With the exception of those 2 modifications, is there a motion for the consent agenda to be approved?
I would like to mention one minor modification to the minutes. It has to do with commissioner concerns, and it's the first, I'm going to mention is the first paragraph. And it talks about not being, it says not being a street light on the street going past Lowe's Hardware, and really it's street lights. There are, I'm sure, multiple lights that need to be installed, so I want to make sure that was clear.
And there are additional small modifications to the minutes there on the sheet that's in front of you here at the table. With those exceptions, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? So moved.
Second.
Moved by Bette Wilson Foley, seconded by Michael Fiocco. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries unanimously. At this point, I need a motion on the regular agenda. As it's modified, is there approval for that?
So moved.
Second. Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion carries. We're now entering into the time for a public hearing. Is there a motion to go into public hearing?
So moved.
Second. Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Bette Wilson Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. The motion carries unanimously. Victoria Bailiff is going to lead us in an introduction of the public hearing for the abandonment of a portion of Old Raleigh Road.
Thank you.
Let's turn it on.
TWB Rentals and Shirley Moore submitted a petition to abandon a portion of the Old Raleigh Road right-of-way, February 2nd, 2018. The Board of Commissioners adopted a resolution on February 12th giving notice of the town's intent to permanently abandon this portion of the right-of-way. A weekly notice per state statute has been published 4 consecutive weeks prior to the public hearing. Adjoining property owners were notified, and the right-of-way was posted in 2 locations. On the screen is a survey of the property, and highlighted in red is the portion to be abandoned. There's some aerial view to give you an idea. The recommendation is to hold the public hearing.
There is no one to speak if the public has signed up for the public hearing, but if there are people who failed to sign up that would still like to speak on this topic, we'll be glad to hear from them.
Thank you, ma'am. My name is Steve Beeman. I'm an attorney from Wilson, and I appear this evening on behalf of the current and former owners of the Pittsboro Ford/Crossroads Ford property and the Gunters who own the property just to the east of that property. I believe the materials you have are self-explanatory, but I did want to offer to answer any questions that you may have with regards to this request.
Questions by the board?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. There being no further questions regarding this public hearing, is there a motion the public hearing be closed?
So moved.
Moved by Michael Fiocco.
Second.
Seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Motion carries unanimously. With respect to citizens' matters, that is the next matter on our agenda, and there is no one signed up to speak during the public expression period. Is there anyone who wishes to speak who failed to sign up when they came in? Hearing none, then we'll move to commissioner updates. This is a period of time in which we discuss matters that we've attended to outside of our usual public meetings. It was a particularly busy time here for me. On the 27th, I attended a Triangle J joint board meeting in Siler City. On the 1st of March, I attended a Triangle J mayors and chairs meeting in Research Triangle Park. On the 5th of March, I met with staff and members of the Chatham Park Development. On the 6th of March, I read with students at the Pittsboro Elementary School. That's always one of the most fun projects. Later that evening, I attended the Parks Workshop on the Parks Master Plan. On the 8th of March, attended a Water Resources Collaborative at Triangle J Council of Government, where Hunter Freeman talked on the Chatham Park Stormwater Initiatives. And at that meeting, I was appointed as the co-chair for the upcoming year. In March, on the 11th of March, I attended a League of Women Voters meeting. And are there other reports from folks who attended meetings or Main Street, climate change, Triangle J, anything?
Well, like I mentioned, the Main Street Committee, as we all passed this evening, on the consent agenda, the expansion of the boundary for a second time, I think a month's time. I think it was a good omission that we put this property back in. And Steve Carr came and made a passionate request, so his information was very well received. So that happened. And I can also say that the Main Street program is working on their fiscal budget request for 18-19. And I think that'll be being submitted in the next week or maybe two. I don't know the status. I know the design committee has submitted their request. And I'll be attending the EDC meeting tomorrow morning.
I attended the Triangle J Council of Government meeting on February 28, 2018, the executive board, and we're in the process of redoing the charter because it is somewhat outdated. In terms of outdated, some it's not really bad, but some of the wording and so forth and so on needs to be updated. And then on March 1st, I attended an affordable housing committee meeting, which was very, very enlightening, very good. And basically, one thing that the Affordable Housing Task Force has done, they did an assessment of the Siler City neighborhoods, and I'll pass this around so you all can see that. It looked at the housing in terms of some poor quality housing in Siler City, and they analyzed how to try to address the housing concerns within the particular area. So this is a very, very good report, I will have to say. They're going to do that also in Pittsboro as well as in Worcester. they will look at the housing assessment in terms of the quality of housing and what we can do to try to bring things up to date.
Very good.
I want to follow up with that. I attended a press conference and then the town board meeting in Fowler City for 100 families that were displaced who were living in a mobile home park. Mountainair has purchased the property and all of the residents have been evicted. It's difficult because the people own their mobile homes, but they did not own the property. So apparently the mobile homes cannot be moved after a certain amount of years. So basically these families have nothing, and they're all at risk of becoming homeless. And the unfortunate thing is Mountainair has received a great deal of funding of incentives from not only the town and the county. And it just really made me realize how much we need to make sure that doesn't happen here. Because now it's very difficult to they're trying to negotiate with Mountainair to give these families some sort of compensation. But it's tragic hearing these people speak about their experience really put a face on the need. And it really made an impression on me. And when we are looking at issues of affordable housing in Pittsburgh as well as incentive packages, we need to address these kinds of things to protect families.
And in light of that, March the 15th will be the first meeting of the Affordable Housing Task Force. And Jim Noss has been putting a group of materials together for that particular meeting, and we look forward to that process being started.
What's the date on that?
That's March the 15th.
It's this Thursday.
Is it an evening meeting?
Yes.
I'll also be having the first meeting of the Human Relations Committee for next Thursday.
All right.
I was unable to attend the March 1st Chatham County Climate Advisory Committee meeting with a sick child. But I do have the agenda. I was informed that they did make quorum, but I have not received a report from that meeting. But it occurred to me that with my sick children and with Mayor's interest in climate, I'm wondering if you might consider attending some of these county advisory committee meetings.
Yes.
So maybe that's something we could chat about.
We can. Good.
Thank you.
Or at least back you up.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Thank you.
All right. Any other updates? If not, our first item of old business is the Northwood PUD rezoning, and Victoria Bailiff will lead us in that rezoning request.
Eco Partners is proposing to rezone approximately 91 acres located along the western side of US 15501, just north of the US 64 bypass, from RE2 residential agriculture to MUPD mixed-use plan development. This parcel has been zoned RE2 since the late 1980s. The future land use plan has designated this property for commercial, and the surrounding properties are zoned MUPD to the south. To the north and to the west, there are properties zoned RE2, while the properties to the east are zoned C2, CU, and PDD. Staff finds that the proposed amendment is consistent with the future land use plan, and that this parcel presents a suitable location for the MUPD district, as these parcels are located at the corner of two highways. The parcel is positioned directly north of an existing MUPD and west of mixed-use development in Chatham Park PDD, also enhances its location suitability for an MUPD. Though staff finds this a suitable location for an MUPD, we would like to make a few notes. Section 5.6 of the zoning ordinance requires that the plan demonstrate adequate wastewater facilities. However, the town's current facility does not have the capacity to handle this size of development. Staff was provided with a letter from Chatham Park allocating this MUPD with the necessary wastewater. However, the Chatham Park facility is not yet operational, and the details of how this new facility and the town will function are still in negotiations. Also, while this development is not a part of the Chatham Park PDD, in as many ways possible, this development has used Chatham Park elements. The Northwood narrative has proposed a 30-foot Type C streetscape buffer along all exterior publicly dedicated roads, including the US 64 bypass. Whereas currently written, the Chatham Park landscape element requires a 50-foot Type D streetscape buffer along the US 64 bypass. This site is located within the Major Transportation Corridor Overlay District, and the zoning ordinance states that an MUPD within this district must comply with the purpose and intent of the MTC Overlay District, and that there shall be an appropriate buffer along arterial roads with appropriate landscaping. Staff does not find the 30-foot Type C buffer to be appropriate. The Powell Place MUPD, just to the south of this site, has been referenced to have a 20-foot transitional buffer. However, this is not what is currently in place. The closest structure to the right-of-way is approximately 130 feet from the right-of-way line, with approximately 80 feet of existing vegetation between the house and the right-of-way. I'm giving you this information because I know when Powell Place is referenced, you all can picture the view of Powell Place from the bypass very well. And I don't want you to do that because it's not a 20-foot transitional buffer currently. And what has been proposed should not be compared. Where we've got 3 canopy trees, 5 understory trees for every 100 linear feet. Not much to compare to existing vegetation. The planning board requested a 50-foot buffer, and the applicant said that they could offer a 50-foot Type C buffer. We would also like to note that the landscaping of walls and fences requirement from the Chatham Park landscape element has not been included in the narrative. However, the Chatham Park element allows walls and fences as close as 5 feet to the lot line, whereas Northwood narrative requires fences and walls 20 feet from a public right-of-way. A public hearing was held on January 22nd. There were no citizens who spoke at this hearing. One of the commissioners showed interest in the inclusion of the language noted in the staff recommendation, with the amendment that there be no landscaping requirement for walls with artistic elements. The planning board considered this rezoning at their meetings on February 5th and March 5th, 2018. The board posed questions regarding traffic patterns around the site and requested a larger buffer, as discussed earlier. The board found the request was consistent with the future land use plan, and in a vote of 5-0 recommended to approve. Yeah, any questions?
I do have a question. When the notice was given of a public hearing, was Northwood notified of this?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay.
So, adjacent properties.
Because I was just going to mention, we posted something about this on the Town of Pittsburgh Facebook page, and I was really amazed by the response. People are asking, when is the public hearing? And people had a lot to say, and I encourage commissioners to go to Facebook and see the comments, because people seem to be very concerned about traffic, about the safety for the school, things that it's unfortunate that they weren't here to voice during the public hearing, but I still think those concerns are valid.
That's kind of on the county, because we don't send out letters to all the students and parents, so we're just the property owner.
Right, I understand. I'm not attacking anything. It would be nice if we could somehow, I don't know if it's possible to have a hearing, another public hearing, just so students and parents can have a voice. I don't know what the answer is, but there seems to be a lot of people. You never can tell about Facebook if people are just commenting or if they really genuinely concerned, but there was a great deal of comments in a short amount of time after that was posted.
Mark Ashes?
Did you want to address that?
Please. Good evening, board members and staff. Mark Ashton with the C Group, 301 Glenwood Avenue, Raleigh, North Carolina. As Victoria mentioned, we had the presentation in January, went to the planning board in February. Kimberly Horn actually presented a fairly detailed synopsis of all of the traffic improvements that some don't necessarily affect this specific project, but they also affect Chatham Park and the Northwood High School. And then, as Victoria mentioned, at the recent planning board meeting, we agreed to a 50-foot type C buffer. The Northwood, the Powell Place buffer is a 20-foot MUPD, and they have not built on those parcels yet, so you're correct. It's not obvious to what you'll see in the future, but nonetheless, that's what's opposing us. With regards to the traffic, one of the unique things about this project is usually when we come in for a rezoning, we'll tell you we've done some traffic modeling and this is how things are going to be impacted, and then through the construction drawing process, we would come back and actually get permits from agencies like NCDOT. But because this specific roadway improvement project is associated also with Chatham Park, we're already there. So we have a approval letter from NCDOT for all of these improvements. So there is no ambiguity tonight as to what's out there. We've submitted detailed information, Kimberly Horn did, to DOT. They've reviewed all of that, and the intensities are equal or above what we're actually planning in that location. And it is significant. It's significant in that Northwood High School is going to benefit substantially with the additional access point. They'll have a second signal access that's a little bit north of the current intersection, in addition to the road improvements on the existing Northwoods Road. So I know at the planning board meeting, in our presentation initially, we talked about the benefits of what this project will do in conjunction with the project across the street for the high school. So I feel like those issues are really kind of in the rearview mirror. I'm sure a lot of the neighbors and people in town may not be aware, but we do have the driveway permits in hand. So it's not something that we're telling you we're going to do. It's something that's already been accomplished. And I'll be glad to answer any questions specific about the transportation improvements out there.
I have a question about the road that's in the southwest corner. What does that connect to? What is the plan for that? Is that good?
The east-west road?
Yeah. Is that going to go to Highway 64, or is that going to go to a service road? What is that going to go to?
So we don't have control of the property to the west of here, but we feel compelled to believe that this road would continue on to Old 87 at some time in the future. And it's just it's prudent to provide that corridor. We've actually provided a expanded right-of-way than what we would need today. Sort of thinking in terms of the future. 20 years from now, is that really sort of a service road that sort of parallels the bypass? And maybe there's an interchange at Old 87 at that time. Who knows? But that's sort of the thought process there. Let's go ahead and put that right-of-way in place so that we wouldn't need to come back and get that, or the town wouldn't need to in 20 years.
I believe that if you were not showing that, we would be asking you to show that.
At the subdivision phase, that's right.
Either.
Yep.
I might ask you right now
Sure.
to show interconnectivity, because that's what we're trying to achieve.
And that's a good point. There's one other condition. Wade Barber owns some property to the south right here, and he's been supportive of this project, but he has some specific conditions that he'd like access provided to him. I've shared this with the town staff, but it's basically vehicular and utility access to his parcel there, and we're happy to do that. Victoria mentioned to me before the meeting that we just need to, rather than this be a condition, we'll just include this as part of the narrative in the MUPD, I believe.
It would be in the master plan, I hope.
Yes. Wherever you'd like for it, you could just make that a condition. We'll be glad to do that. And I'll be glad to answer any other questions, traffic, or other issues that you might have.
Mark, I have one, well, a couple of them. I think Michael had mentioned this last time about that Street A as being a airstrip. I look at it as a drag strip. What are we going to do to slow traffic down without any kind of roundabout?
Good question. So this map doesn't really show it. It's sort of an illustrative plan, but there's going to be several drive accesses. There'll be another one coming out of the apartments. There'll be one here. one somewhere in this location, then there'll be multiple access points here. So I think those driveway connections, you know, we're just showing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lots here. The reality is that this may be a single project on 3 lots, right? We just don't know that today, so we're showing flexibility. But when these driveway cuts get brought in at a site development phase, I think that will provide the traffic calming that you're talking about. We're certainly also willing to put at our pedestrian crossing points, if we want to do some kind of a raised path area that goes across with pavers, we'd be happy to do that also.
That'd be a good idea with the apartments.
Absolutely, yep.
How about some gentle curves?
We can certainly look at that. There'll be some elevation change. So when you visualize that, it looks like, you know, looks straight. But the reality is that the land itself has some roll to it also. So it, I don't think it would be out of the question to, again, this is a rezoning phase, a illustrative plan, and we can certainly look at that
So it's
when we
site
come
plan.
back for the subdivision. It would be actually a subdivision phase.
Subdivision plan.
Yep. So be glad to look at that.
Well, I appreciate that. I think it's interesting that Commissioner Farrell and I've heard Commissioner Fiocco express similar concerns, and I share the concerns about this very long strip. I also very much appreciate that you've shown a willingness, a vision towards the future of this being a substantial thoroughfare. I think you know, I'm also seeing that there is the significant cluster of trees in your tree inventory. They're right about 13 and 14, I am aware of and appreciate the tree cover protection areas that you've already established in this drawing. As you consider ways to calm that street, that thoroughfare, at subdivision phase level, I'd very much appreciate if you would consider that cluster of trees at 13 and 14, because I think that will create another nice feature and asset to the properties and to that neighborhood right across the street from the fairly high-density garden apartments. When we talked about it before, I recall you saying that number of garden apartments had been successfully developed on many fewer acres in your experience. And so I think it might be conceivable to key in a little bit to that.
Yeah, we have a
15.3 acres.
We've got some tree save in this corner
Yes,
right here.
and the marquee spot, I think you
Yep,
described it
that's
as.
right.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
Yes. And I very much appreciate that. And I think this other on the south side there, it could curve around and eat a little bit into that residential 15.3 acres and set it aside on the lots 13 and 14. Anyway, it's an idea.
I'll be glad to look at it, and like I said, I think we come back the next time, we may have more specific uses in mind, whereas right now we're kind of taking a reasonable guesstimate of and making sure we have enough area and depth
That's the next time they're coming
certain uses.
I have a question.
How can you change the uses at subdivision phase?
Around
He's
there,
talking about to add more
number 3
uses or
and
changing
number 4,
uses. How can you do that at
You
subdivision?
you're going to have 2 entrances into Northwood.
Correct.
Are you planning to have a stoplight and an additional stoplight? I'm telling you, Northwood, it's dead traffic over there.
So there's
It's
another
horrendous.
light up here. So there's a light here if you're coming from town, for
Right.
example. There'll be a light here. There is no light here, but what happens is if you're coming into the center here, there's actually a left turn lane. It's about 400 feet, and you're stacking traffic, and they just make a leftover whenever it's free. So if this light turns red here and people haven't really started queuing out of here, someone can make a leftover, but they have plenty of stacking. And vehicles can still go by that area in 2 lanes, and they have the option of turning left here, or they have the option of going up to the next light and turning left. So there's going to be 2 traffic signals that allow you access into Northwood.
That's true, but I was just concerned about that other, around 3 and 4, because you are entering, you will be going in there also. Is that not correct?
Right, so 3 and 4, basically you've got a road that has essentially a turning lane in the median that would allow you to turn, make a right up into this sort of access area that we have right here, or you'll come down to a stop sign and up, and then this is sort of a free-flowing movement here. So the only signals proposed are here and here. And, you know, the traffic studies, what they've done is they've put adequate storage in all of these locations to ensure that, yeah, there's a 400-foot storage right here. There's another, there's 300 feet of storage here, this location. There's 400 feet of storage again to make a left turn into the new signal up there.
Those are good, but my main concern is that other entrance right there.
Right here, yeah.
Yes, that's my main concern.
So this entrance again, it is a leftover. So you're not really. We don't. DOT wouldn't want this either. They don't want to have another queuing stop at this point. There's certain spacing from interchange to this intersection to allow movement to occur. The good news is that at this location there's enough storage in this left turn that it doesn't interfere with any of the traffic going by in the northerly direction, and it still allows them to move over when they can at that spot. And that kind of, it's called Smart Street, I think is how it's referred to. I mean, you're seeing it really across the state now. It's been pretty successful. I mean, DOT's idea is they want to minimize signals and have those at important locations and have less signals. And so that's what, as you go around the state, you're going to see signals being taken out across the state.
I do understand that, but Northwood is terrible. That traffic is horrible.
Yes.
During the mornings and in the afternoons when the parents are taking their children, it is absolutely, and the children are.
There's also, when you're leaving Northwood, for example, to make a left turn, there's going to be dual left turns coming out of Northwood in this direction. 150 feet of storage on both of those. At the other intersection that shows up here, there's going to be 300 foot of storage. These are all things that don't exist today. So I can tell you that, I mean, these are substantial improvements. When you are doubling the accessibility to the site by signal and then adding a third point that's free flowing and adding all of these storage areas to make left turns out, you're now really allowing, so if someone today, you know, wants to go straight or go right, a lot of times they're held up. That's what these left turn lanes are for. So it's really, yeah, two left turn lanes here coming out at 150 feet, and then 300 feet at the next one coming out. So I think that it's not just the number of points of access, but it's all of the storage that's being provided. And you know, there's been a lot of number crunching and a DOT approval with this.
And I do understand that.
So the road that's further north, where would that light be? Where would that turn be?
It's about another 900 feet. Yeah. There. Let's see. Yes, that's it right here. This is a great picture here. It's right at this location right here. So what's going to happen is, if you're coming from the north, most people, unless they're stopping at Bojangles or the root cellar, they're going to come down and make that first right and come in. So that's going to take a lot of pressure off the interchange. If you're coming from the town heading this way, you really got three options. You got a left over here, you got another left turn here with stacking, or you can keep going and then you got another left turn right there. So I think you're going to be.
And people are already turning down by the boat.
That's right.
Going all the way
people are
to
doing this move right now. They're doing this
circle.
move and coming around and queuing up to go across, right? So what we're giving them now is that spot, more left turn storage here, and a whole other place to turn at this point there.
And what is the name of the southernmost intersection?
Right here?
Nope. Back in your project.
This is Russet Run right here.
The next one?
The one that
So this is the next one. That's to be named.
Southernmost.
Leftover.
Oh, the leftover. Yeah, the leftover right
The
there.
one
Yes.
that we were talking
Do we
about.
have a name for that?
No, I mean it hasn't. We haven't given it a name.
But it is for those exiting your development will be prohibited from turning right.
That's correct.
It's physically not possible unless you jump the curve or
Turn left, you go to
turn
town.
right. Excuse me, left.
Yeah,
Go north. You won't be able to go north.
Right.
That's correct. You'll have to
Have to
turn
go right.
in this direction right here. That's
That's
correct.
mainly going to serve people that will be going south anyway, whereas the other one would be people that are going north.
Yeah, and as I mentioned in the public hearing and the planning board, we really feel like there's some benefit too. You're going to have people, maybe they've dropped their kids off at school, or there's a sporting event that night, but they want to get the groceries or do something else. You know, they'll be able to do that without getting back on 15501, right? And it's not like this project is really just capturing trips that are coming by. Does that make sense? In other words, you've already got a tremendous amount of trips on 15501, and all we're doing is capturing that in this location.
Yeah.
Plus, a lot of the retail traffic won't be there at the same time the school is coming. Most of those are over.
That's right.
Well, I think anybody who has traveled north on 15501 at 7:30 or quarter to 8 in the morning knows that not only is there a huge amount, much more than the left turn lane as the light can accommodate. I mean, they are flowing into the fast lane there, but also the traffic coming off of the bypass, cutting across so that it can make it to turn left into Northwood. And then today, when traffic was letting out, when the school was let out at noon, I cannot tell you how far backed up. They're just all over the apron of the road. And although I'm certainly encouraged that this is going to be much better, I think that it's not just pass-by traffic. It's going to be how many apartments. It's going to be the grocery store. It's going to be a center that's going to attract people, and I think it's going to be much more than this. But you've got the DOT approval, and
normally we would not have that at this stage
I
of the
understand
process.
that, but that's okay.
Mark,
That's pretty good.
explain the exit ramp too, the new signalization that's taken off of that.
Yes.
Everybody referring that to
Thank you. Signalization at the exit ramp.
Yes.
Yes. Yep. So there's signalization here and here. There already is. Yeah. And what we're doing is we're putting in a left turn lane here at this spot there, and let's see here. It's 150. There's already right now. There's a straight and a left. We're adding a dedicated left of 150 feet going this way, and then this lane is being eliminated right here. This is kind of an unsafe condition to begin with, because what happens is when you're coming along here, if you know you don't have to stop or make a sharp turn, you just push to the floor right here, and you just keep going, because you got plenty of room to kind of continue to accelerate and work your way in. So this, one of the reasons we're eliminating this is I think it's safer, but it also then allows more room for someone to be able to maneuver from here to get to this leftover. Whereas if they were coming here, that's not enough room, that would be dangerous. So there's kind of a double benefit at that spot.
And when is the timing for the signals at those two spots?
I know that some of the improvements are planned. They've been working with the school, and maybe, I don't know, Tim may be better to speak to this issue because you've had the direct discussions with them, but there's concern about doing this work, during certain times of the year.
My name's Tim Smith, Chatham Park. This road here, we've been meeting with the school board 5 years on this whole process. There's been quite a lot of public meetings with the school board, which parents could have spoken if they did, some did. But the school board is in favor of this project because it does give two means of access. And back to your question, it's crowded here. What the school board wanted us to do, Chris Bryce, is to split the amount of traffic. So 50% is going to come here, 50% is going to go there, whereas now 100% comes out of there. Your question is, when is it going to be constructed? The 44-acre Mosaic project, we pledged to the school and of course to you guys that this road will be constructed and all phase 1 improvements will be done before the first CO is left on this. So before the first building is occupied, we'll say maybe the hotel, in 2 years we will have all of these phase 1 improvements. Then when this starts developing before the first CO in it, we'll have all these improvements done. So this is sort of phase 2, this is phase 1. We will start this summer, work through the summer, We've agreed that we will not interrupt their soccer field or their cross-country track, which is like August to October. So we will have to work 2 summers here. So over the next 2 summers, that'll be done. This light will be put up sometime in the next year, and that little widening will be done there. So the phase 1 wide, everything will be done in the next 24 months. So we have to work around the school. We have to put a little turn lane here, and it has to be done in the summer. And this has to be done mainly in the summer, the part that's connected up here. But we've been working with them, and they are really excited about this because it does give them a second way out. Where something happened on this road, or water line busted, or I mean, you could not get out.
The second entrance to Northwood, I think that was great, but my only concern was that little area, that was
I don't think that's a problem because it's just the people that want to turn into the center, and like you say, there's room to stack about 40 cars right there as you turn in.
And then you said you want to change
And you
something.
can go to here, or you can go to here.
And you changed something, you say, over in that general area,
Here?
further down,
Here?
right here, yes.
Well, on phase 2, we'll eliminate that flow-through lane because you don't want to flow through and then have to get over real quick to turn. You'll have to come here and go to a stoplight.
That was my concern.
So a stoplight, you will get in and it'll give you time to merge.
Okay.
So
Yes.
that
We'll
one
be
is
installing
phase
this new
2.
stoplight, and we'll be taking out
Get rid
that
of that.
merge, that ramp, merge.
So, what again are the phases of the lights at the bypass?
Okay, phase 1, which is coinciding with the mosaic, is this light and a turn lane here. It's reworking this light. It's putting in this light in this road with turn lanes for these new intersections. Phase 2 will be this turn lane, eliminating that, reworking that light, and putting in all these improvements here. Sidewalks on both sides, as you see. That's basically a 5-lane road. It's 2 lanes with a turn lane in the middle. So it's a vast improvement. Plus, there'll be walking sidewalks on both sides, which are not there now, and we'll have a pedestrian crossing across so you can get over there. So it's I'd say school board's excited because it's a way to pay for all this and get it by doing this commercial development. And so, scratch my back, we'll scratch your scenario. So I think it's working out really well.
Thank you. It's very helpful.
Thank you.
So, to the improvements on 15501. I hear phase 1, I hear phase 2, and what I'd like to know is, and see on the plans, are the improvements that are associated and the obligation of this project.
So we did. We submitted the traffic analysis that details all of these improvements. It's in the submission package.
So I think it's in the TIA probably, which
Yes.
is very hard.
It's a thick
Yeah.
document. Yeah, that's correct.
So I'd like to see it on the illustrative plan. It says, and you've got a phasing plan, phase 1, 2, 3, 4. And what I'd like to know is what improvements are associated with the phasing of the project. And I'd like to see it on the illustrative plan because that's going to be really easy to see, find again, and know.
So roughly what Mr. Smith just shared with us
Sounds
in
right.
writing on the
Yeah.
illustrative plan.
Yeah, and the illustrative plan does make reference to improvements plans for 15501, but they're not in here. So I don't know if that's just as simple as putting that set in for some site plan that shows it. Because I really don't, I mean, looking at it, I can't tell from here what improvements are associated with this project.
Yeah.
So basically, the phase 2 improvements that Tim mentioned are associated with this project.
Okay.
And the phase 1 improvements are really ongoing at this point. But they'll be in before the first CO.
So if we could do that, that would answer a lot of questions I have about.
I guess we'd be willing to state that the phase 1 improvements, those are noted in the traffic study by phase in the document. The phase 1 improvements would be in prior to the first CO in the Mosaic project, and the phase 2 improvements will be in prior to the first CO in the Northwood MUPD project.
You know, I don't need to conflate Mosaic and this project, but simply to see what this project's responsibility is. Mosaic will have their own opportunity to have a responsibility.
I think what the way we could word it, that every one of these improvements on this map will be complete before the first CO will be filed. So it really doesn't matter Part A or Part B. Before any CO is issued on this piece of property, every one of these improvements on this page is done.
That does it.
Would this phase one need to be done before you start on this project? Does phase one improvements need to be finished before this one starts?
Well, here again, phase one's going to be done here, and they'll be completed before CO is issued here. But we will state phase one and two will both be complete before CO is issued here. Mr. Fiocco is wanting to see the division based on this zoning. This zoning will say all of them will be complete before anything is built on this.
But you could have two started and none finished.
No, we will have all, 1 and 2 finished before CO is done on this project.
But you could start before you've got the CO on both of them.
Oh yeah, we got permission from DOT to do every one of these improvements right now. Plans are done, they're approved. We could do them all. We don't intend to do them all, just phase one, because you're looking at about $5 million. So we can just do this one first.
But traffic won't be generated until you have a CO in place.
Right, it'll just be construction traffic.
Does that answer your question?
That-
Condition that
Yep.
they would all be done.
Yep.
So how will you address the wastewater issue that Jeff Jones talked
That's
about?
a good question, but again, we're at the rezoning phase, and so, I mean, I've been involved in a lot of projects in various municipalities where to get a property rezoned, you have to show that you have a plan to have access to utilities, and we've certainly established that. When we come back to subdivide, to create a lot that we can sell to a party B, that's a different story. You know, when you're doing that, you better have something that's a little more finite. So at this point, I don't see that being an issue for the rezoning. We've shown what our plan of action is.
Let me just speak on that for 1 minute. We have a pump station here at the down below where the Mosaic is going to have a pump station here at the UNC. That's going to be upgraded. The high school pumps down a force main to go to the town plant. This will be gravity to here, and it'll come gravity down the creek to this to this pump station, and it will be forced all the way back to the new plant that we're building on Highway 64. So we will have enough gallons there, 500,000 gallons, to take care of all this, and then whatever bypasses that will go to Sanford line. So this all goes that way.
Okay, I've got some other things to talk about. I don't see on the plans, I can find it in the traffic impact analysis, but I can't find it on the plans, what the quantity of the uses are. So I think those should be listed.
We're going through a rezoning right now. We provided in the traffic impact study some anticipated density of development, but this is a rezoning, and it's not. If we went above the level that the traffic impact study showed, we would have to come back. That would be the best way to answer that question. In other words, our development pattern is anticipating to be equal or less than that intensity that's shown in the traffic impact study.
But you do provide a counting of the apartments, 264 units.
Plus or minus, right.
And I think the TIA says 250,000 square feet. Honestly, it says retail, office with residential above, and I don't think there's any mention in this plan of residential above. So there's clearly a correlation, obviously, between the TIA and what this plan is showing. And so it's important to get those uses aligned.
What we did was we anticipated that there could be residential above some of the retail, and I think it does say that in the narrative, but we don't. All we did was put that in there. It's like us saying that a car dealership could go right here, or a movie theater could go right here. It's not. All we're trying to do at this point in the rezoning is put a a loop around the types of uses that could be here. And we've provided a traffic impact analysis that says our uses will not exceed this amount.
Right. And so can we not put that on the elected plan? And simply putting a note that says the commercial uses will be no more than 250,000 square feet to align with the transportation impact analysis. If that were to change, you'd have to revise the transportation impact analysis.
Correct. That's correct. Yep. We would have to.
So we're basing a lot of the rezoning basically on that density because it associates with the traffic impact, associates with the utility impact.
That's correct.
So it seems important because all the other MUPDs that I've seen do that. They talk about maximum densities.
It's not, let me explain it this way. It's not based on densities. It's based on traffic. It's based on what generates traffic. If you have a car dealership, it generates less traffic than a grocery store. If you have an office, it generates less than a medical office. So this is based on a traffic impact analysis. Let's say, I'm throwing out a number, 25,000 cars a day. So whatever the uses are will not exceed that traffic count a day or peak hour. So different uses have different peak hours and different traffic patterns. So you can't say square footage because restaurants have more than a hobby shop or whatever. So we're basing it on traffic only, not basing it on square footage. And that's the way we've done all of Chatham Park is based on, Mosaic, everything's based on the amount of traffic.
But your MUPD is got entitlements as to a certain number of square feet of commercial use and a certain density of residential uses. Why should this be any different?
Because this land will accommodate far more than 250,000 square feet. This land will accommodate 1 million square feet, but we don't have the capacity to handle that much traffic with these improvements. We come back and add more traffic, we have to add more improvements. That's why we're showing a road out the back to 87. So 5, 6, 7 years from now, we can come back and add another entrance, add another road, build up more traffic, and we can put 500,000 square feet on there, as long as our traffic is met with DOT and the town's traffic studies. So we don't want to put a limit on the amount of square footage, it's based on traffic. You got me?
We can't add any more intensity today. DOT would not. Our driveway permits specify a ceiling for impact. I just think of an example. We're doing a project like this in Apex. In that project, there was no ceiling on commercial retail. As a condition, the town wanted a certain amount of office space they were seeking, and so we had that. And then we did have a condition on the number of apartments that we could have over retail. There was a limitation, but the commercial retail, there was no limit to that. It was whatever the traffic impacts would allow in that location. So that's a fairly typical way, to do that.
So are you saying that you're going to do a traffic impact analysis with every site plan to document the traffic?
We would have a cumulative. So in other words, as projects are approved, similar to a wastewater or water allocation, there'll be a continuous check to see where we are in relation to the traffic impacts. That's correct. And then even in the future, there could be studies done. Say, okay, we are now 60% built out, and are we actually generating 40% of the traffic that was anticipated, versus 60%? Those are kind of things that you would follow up on. It's similar to wastewater when you recalibrate, actual flows, tributary flow to a pump station based on an earlier calculation. It's been my experience that generally the traffic studies are conservative, that the background growth is always less than what they project. That's been my experience.
So we'll be basing the development on trips per day. So there's going to be a tally. Is there a number of trips per day that in the TIA that this project's generating, so that when a site plan comes in, Jeff and Victoria or whoever else is working in planning knows whether it complies with the MUPD?
We'd be glad to do that.
There is a portion of this MUPD that does not identify its use, called future development.
Correct. So that would have to be permitted and reviewed at a separate time in the future. It is not, so at this point in time, there is no allowed use without us coming back to you for something specific in that location.
So it doesn't have the benefit of all the uses in the MUPD?
It can't be developed at this time without us coming back to you.
Well, nothing can be developed without coming back with a site plan.
Correct.
But you're talking about just a site plan?
No.
Or the fact that it doesn't have a use means you're zoning it without a use?
It's part of the MUPD.
Right, which lists, I don't know,
That's
40
correct.
different uses that are permitted. And this parcel doesn't want to get the benefit of those uses?
It doesn't have I guess you could let me look at how we have it shown.
Is it included in the TIA?
It's not included as a developed portion of the site at this time. That's the best way to answer it. It's not factored as a developed piece of property at this time.
Why would you include it in the MUPD?
It was part of the original parcels.
So the transit section was interesting. It says that if development occurs before transit is identified, that the project will reserve easements for transit facilities and will build them. I think that's great. Question I have is what will be the method for granting the easements after the sale of property? Is there going to be some reservation on the property of some sort to accommodate those facilities? Because I can see a situation where obviously development occurs, the parcel is sold, MUPD says going to build it, and the buyer says, I'm not going to do that.
Well, we've shown on the illustrative plan a regional bus stop that's near the apartment side of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we were speaking to in that area, was that we would allocate accessibility through both the public roads obviously is not an issue, but even the private roads would allow that accessibility through those streets. And I guess at some point if a second stop was necessary, we'd have to visit that issue.
That's what I'm thinking of, is the second stop.
Yeah, in the commercial area?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, just the scale of this project is significant, and thinking about that straightaway as my key, if you will, to the distances within the project, that's about a half a mile straightaway. Quarter-mile walks, I think that's reasonable. I think it'd be great to see a bus stop in that commercial area. And it kind of jives with some questions that I had about sidewalks, because sidewalks were mentioned, but I didn't, in the limited time that I had to review this, I did not see sidewalks specifically drawn in. And I'm sure that will come at subdivision.
Yeah, there'll be sidewalks on both sides of the roads.
Of all thoroughfares?
Yes. I think our detail sheet shows that in the submission set. There's a back sheet that shows the various roads we proposed. I'm pretty sure there's a sidewalk shown on all those sections.
And along 15501 as well?
Along 15501, we're showing a sidewalk from the left over going back up to the intersection where the signal is at Northwoods, and then there'll be a sidewalk on the north side of that intersection that will cross over to Russet Run.
But nothing in preparation for going south across the intersection?
In talking with the town, it's our understanding that there's going to be potentially a sidewalk on the east side of the 15501. In our experience, and we experienced this in Durham, on a project very similar right next to I-40, where we didn't want to send a sidewalk to nowhere. DOT actually overruled the city of Durham and said, we do not want you to put a sidewalk down to this interchange because we are never going to have a crossing of the interchange on that side. However, we're going to cross on the other side, and so then that's what we did there. So I think we're trying to match up with what the town has told us. There's going to be a sidewalk on the east side, and so with that crossing over at the Northwood High School Road, we don't want to send someone south to a point where they get to the ramp. There's no adequate sidewalk on the bridge or anything like that. So that's our thought process there.
So, sorry, I may have missed something in that. I was thinking some other things, but regarding that future transit, I guess this is going to have an owners association.
Yes.
And I guess that would be the party that would then be responsible for constructing the improvement.
Yeah, I think that the time between now and when we come back for a subdivision approval, I think we would do some analysis and evaluation from a traffic standpoint. And if it's warranted to have a second location based on the proximity from where we're currently showing our location, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't have that. I mean, that's an issue that we can, because at that point we'll be really more in the weeds in terms of the detail of the plans for discussion. So that's what I would suggest.
Well, I think that's an appropriate suggestion if you'll meet with Chatham Transit. They're transit at the moment.
Sure.
The next major item that I've got has to do with recreation. And the MUPD states that the common recreational facilities shall be shown on the illustrative plan. I don't see any facilities.
I think in our narrative we mentioned the park site, and then we also mentioned that within the apartment site itself there would be a full amenity package. And so the only residential on the property is in the apartments right now. That's what the plan is. We do have, like you said, an allowance to have some over the retail, whether that happens or not. So that the residents that live in the project will have access to the swimming pool and some of the other typical things that you see in a modern garden-style apartment complex. And then the area that John spoke to, where we have the strand of trees as you come in, we view that as a park setting that will have walks and trails. There's going to be a stormwater pond in that area. That's certainly open to anyone, not just someone that lives in the apartments, but someone that's frequenting one of the restaurants, or maybe someone shopping and someone just wants to go read a book. They're going to have access to that, what I would call a passive park area in that location, and we provided parking in that area as well for that, so that someone could actually come to that area without even planning to utilize one of the other facilities and park next to it.
And the ordinance says these facilities will be publicly dedicated.
The park area is an open space, and it could be publicly dedicated if that's the case. So.
Well, it talks about public dedication, and it talks about public construction of active recreation facilities. And I think what you're proposing, and I'm having this discussion much for this board's consideration, is that you're proposing to do a payment in lieu and build the greenways and the community park and the park for the facilities for the apartments, and to maintain maintenance and ownership obligation of all those facilities.
I would say that at this point in time, we're prepared to build the private facilities for the apartments, the park that we just described. There are greenway trails shown on the property and multi-use trails. As to whether some of those things are determined as a cost abatement to some of the rec fees, I mean, that's whatever your ordinances prescribe in that regard. And again, that's almost in the weeds issue, like at the subdivision phase, determining what would be potentially an abatement cost versus the fee in lieu type of thing.
Well, I think your narrative describes that scenario that I just discussed. And I'm more than happy And I think it's appropriate for facilities within the apartment complex to be associated with that and to be private. The greenways and I think the community park, whether they're publicly maintained or privately maintained, I think they should be accessible to the public. I think there's some language in the document that states that legally and practicably, the facilities will be appropriate for the intended users, and I would suggest that language be stricken to say the public. So essentially what I'm saying is the greenways in the community park, those would be publicly accessible even if they're privately maintained.
I think that's a reasonable expectation.
Well, tell me, I can imagine with the Street A, it's a 70-foot right-of-way, you're saying we're going to reserve another 30 feet probably to accommodate additional lanes when that facility does go further to the west? Is that the thinking on it?
Yes, that's correct.
And so that cross-section would be a 4-lane road at that time?
I think it's to be determined really at that time. What it would be.
But so when you reserve it, essentially you're saying land development on those parcels will use that reserved line as their boundary?
Correct. Yes, correct.
So setbacks, buffers, all those
That's
things
right.
will honor that?
That's right. The lot doesn't begin until you get to sort of the gold trim right here. So that would be an additional right-of-way that's just offset from the current street.
Okay. Looking at the cross-sections, I'm seeing that there's no room for street trees in the right-of-way. So they will be planted on private property.
Correct. And there'll be an association that maintains all of these trees. That's correct.
Okay. And they will be planted at the time of road construction?
I would say that, yes, that's the case. They will be planted at the time that that road is essentially CO'd.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
For the public roads. For the, we do have some private access roads right here. I think those would actually be tied into specific plans. But for the roads that we are dedicating as public, it would make sense to do that.
Okay. Okay. So back to the future development parcel, given the fact that you're not designating or assigning any use to it at this time, it's not part of the TIA, whenever it gets developed, it's going to come to the board or to the town for site plan approval, go to DOT for driveway approval, and so it will be responsible for its own improvements if any are required.
It could be part of the overall trip generation for this, but at this point, we're just not prepared to have a use on that site. In other words, one scenario was, should we show it as open space? We did not want to do that, because then if you assume it's open space, you can't sort of pull that back.
Mm-hmm.
That was our thought process in showing it as future development. We don't have an anticipated use for that piece of property, at this time.
Yeah.
But it's fair to say it's part of the MUPD in that the intensities that we have shown here, we still have to come back to you for whatever the use is there. But it's part of the MUPD. So based on adequacy of infrastructure, we would be fine there. That wouldn't be an issue. It would just be a matter of, is the use acceptable to you when we came back at that time?
How many acres is it?
3.2.
I mean, I honestly can't imagine a residential use there.
Correct.
That's why I'm just not sure why there's a reluctance to say it's part of the commercial usage.
Looks like a good gas station site.
I mean, that specific site, that site has some limitations in its proximity to the interchange, and we recognize that. So I think at this point, we didn't have a a planned intention for it, and we just felt like it was better to show it as a future. So it's almost like an area that's null, if you will, and we will have to come back in front of you, but it is part of the MUPD. We'd have to come back, have you approve that use, and then move forward, and we have to be able to show that it fits within the infrastructure availability for the project.
Is it possible that the residential component or any of these uses might not use dumpsters for refuse?
Typically, the types of uses here, the solid waste collection is internalized to a specific lot or shared lots. That's been our experience. So the apartment site might have a compactor unit, something like that within it. And then some of these other uses will have their own individual solid waste collection mechanism. Again, it would be a private hauler type of scenario. And then there'll be some where we might have a shared, where we have two parcels sharing a collection location.
Well, I'm asking that because the narrative seemed to suggest there was a possibility that these larger collections systems would not be used. And I just can't imagine, I don't know if it's the intent here, that you can have rollout garbage collection in this development at all.
Yeah, so it's you're talking about for the apartments?
For any of it.
Yeah. No,
Specifically, the apartments would be a candidate, but honestly, I don't think anyone's on the third floor going to roll out their container.
No. Well, what we're seeing is on the newer apartment projects that we've been involved with, they actually are going to like a concierge service where you leave your trash outside of your door, and you pay an additional fee typically for that. Sometimes it's built in, but it's a nominal fee, and someone actually picks your garbage up and then takes it to the central location versus you driving to that. But we do not anticipate a central collection center that would serve everything here. In other words, everything would be done on an individual or shared lot.
Right. But so no rollout carts.
Right.
Yeah. And I think there's some language that I think page 34, maybe check into that. It made me think that was a possibility, and I'm looking for clarity. I don't think that's the intent. I don't think that's the style of development.
I mean, we speak to the trash containment areas. We speak to having gates, enclosures, well screened. It talks about compactors and dumpsters, which would be applicable, say, to the apartment area. I mean, I feel like we have this sort of showing the range of uses, but that's been our experience is that most of these sites have their own individual way of collection.
And I know there was a lot of borrowed language from Chatham Park, and one of the things that was changed in that language, which not in this project's language, was the screening of these facilities, where it said some of the facilities could be screened by 50%, and the idea is no, screen it 100%. So that screen doesn't go halfway up the dumpster, it goes the entire way to hide the dumpster. Is there a reason, you think, a valid or a good reason for screening these facilities only half the way?
I think in the commercial applications, I mean, I just think in some of the other retail centers I've been involved with, it's those particular structures, as long as you've got hard screening, all the way, but planting, would be not as significant. You're talking about the hard screen?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we wouldn't have any issue
there.
No,
that's landscaping, I don't even...
Yeah. Okay, absolutely. No, the enclosures will be full cover.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the language says you can do it 50%, so as on page 35. And on page 40, there are several references that just, they don't seem to fit. They're referring to unidentified areas. for items that are not included in this project. And I think, again, it's just borrowed.
I mean, can I roll back to the dumpster?
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm saying is that the enclosure should not be less than 8 feet tall or 2 feet taller than the highest point of the compactor,
Yes.
whichever is greater. So that, I think that covers the,
So I don't know what the 50% is all about.
you know.
Maybe just strike the entire list.
I got you. That has to do with the recycling containers is what they're talking about here, roll-out carts in the residential development. Yeah, so that's specific, that was taken from Chatham Park, but what it is specific to is the residential area and and a school site, which we wouldn't have, you know, in this location. I mean, we could strike that whole section 7 if you wanted.
Yeah, I think it could be a nicer facility if those things were screened fully.
Yeah.
The item I was mentioning on page 40, it talks about uses such as lower density residential activity centers, master open space plan additional section, master landscaping plan additional section, and I don't think any of those things are in this project, so
I would agree with that.
you clean that up. There's a reference to tree coverage area, and talks about the tree coverage planning area. What stage does that get defined?
So in our plan, we have identified the tree coverage area is just under 12%, and it was on one of the exhibits. I think it's...
Okay. I missed that.
We have their submission, Victoria, up here. It's in there. We have we define what it is, like 11.9%, I think. And then it's approaching 20% when you include the other open space areas that we have.
And then another question I have is for our staff is, Brian, what is your opinion, or was hoping, we got the finance officer here today, but your opinion regarding the fiscal impact analysis?
I don't recall the fiscal impact, the narrative and the fiscal impact analysis off the top of my head. I can give you an answer later on.
This is that's what we submitted for sir.
Yeah, I think what I was thinking of is Chatham Park had tree coverage area and talked about this tree coverage planning area that was an overall area that each parcel could borrow from.
Yeah, so we're not with it. You know, there are probably there are some aspects that we have borrowed from Chatham Park, but that's not one of them here. I mean, we were showing you what we were showing as protected area for tree coverage, and then we've got additional open space beyond that takes you up closer to 20% of the site.
Okay.
And there was another exhibit that showed that.
So that's just the tree coverage area. Okay. I think that's all I have. I was just asking for staff's opinion of it, honestly. I didn't have specific questions.
Any further questions?
Yeah, I have one. This may be for Jeff or Victoria. Regarding, can you give me an update on this Type B buffer versus Type C?
This is the Type B buffer. You got, this is for every 120 feet. You got 4 trees
trucks?
No trucks. Like we use this to called semi-location and both aesthetic buffer.
And now, in the Chatham Park, now their buffer is type B, right?
Yeah.
And what is the nearest structure again across the road, Powell Place?
It's a single-family residence that's approximately 130 feet from the road.
I think what Mark said was that's not to say that commercial development won't come closer and has the right to by that MUPD.
To be within 20 feet. And that they're directly opposite us on 64. So if you're driving down the road, your view at the same time would be if you look north or south. You know, ultimately, there's an apartment site and a hotel site that abuts 64 and the interchange in Powell Place that has a 20-foot buffer. And the MUPD allows the applicant to suggest what they'd like to use, and it can be as small as 20 feet or larger, obviously. And our site sits up, I mean, you know, just from driving down, so it's not like people are looking down into our site or looking at our site in a flat way. It's generally, they're sort of looking up.
Why did you guys not want to use the C?
We suggested the C. I mean, we were just trying to be consistent. In our project, we're using type C along 15501 also. So we were just sort of establishing a consistency. We knew that it was more than
I mean, B. B is what you didn't.
Right.
Correct.
We had proposed a 30-foot type C, and that was consistent with what we were looking to do around the perimeter of our project. And we knew that it was larger, wider than what Powell Place had across from us. So it's.
I really don't like comparing anything to Powell Place, because we all in here know how messed up that, for better words, messed up that place is over there, with the traffic and all anyway. So.
Well, Mark,
The
you
planning
think a
board,
50-foot C would be fine?
I think personally it would be. We agreed at the planning board that we would take it from 30 feet to 50 feet, and given the elevation relationships, we felt like that was adequate.
And the difference between C and B is probably shrubbery?
I think it's one tree and some shrubbery.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that some of those areas, the existing vegetation will probably just stay there, if that makes sense. So that's just the bottom, the threshold that you have to do if you don't elect to leave the vegetation, you know, right in that area if it meets that criteria. So, I mean, 50 foot is a pretty significant setback.
I have a request. The first illustration you're showing us that was called road improvement, I don't think we got that in our packet, and I would love to have a copy of that if I could be emailed.
Is this
The one that showed the extra entry for Northwood.
yeah, I can give you this.
Okay.
This is more of the, what I call the line drawing, but it shows you the same information. It shows you where that, so this is the new improvement to Northwood, right there. Here's the Northwood High School, there's Russell Run. That's the new access. Here's that leftover. Here's the interchange ramps right there.
Okay.
So that's it.
So, Mark, this is obviously diagrammatic, kind of difficult to visualize. The map that you had up when you were talking about phase 1 and 2, the map I'd like to see included that has the note about the CO. And I think it's crystal clear.
And I just would be interested in having it so that what we put on Facebook, this helps really clarify some of the concerns that people have.
Sure. Yeah.
But although my email address is not working, Mr. Griesbeck has.
I'm sorry?
I just was interested in getting the first map that he showed that was called road improvement. But if you could have I was just saying that you have an alternative email address here because the current one is not working. If you could send it to him, he could send it to me.
Okay, be glad to.
Are there further questions?
Mark, so let me just make this straight. So you guys are going ahead with the 50-foot, correct?
We proposed a 50-foot type C.
Okay.
And all these questions tonight that have been posed will be incorporated into your resubmission, is that correct?
We'll be glad to do that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Our next item of business is Jeff Jones will speak to us about planning board vacancies.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the board. All right, switching gears a little bit, we have unfortunately had a couple of planning board members, an alternate ETJ member and an in-town member, who have requested to resign from the board, and they have done so. Beth Turner's term expires at the end of this year, and Wayne Herndon's expiration date would be on December 31st of 19. As it is, we do have a couple of alternate in-town members, or an alternate in-town member of Steve Cockman, who has expressed some interest in being elevated to a regular board member. So you all can consider Steve's interest in that. And as it is, we have some applications back in January who made appointments to the board, and there was a couple of applications that you all thought that you wanted to put forth on the board, and they you decided to stay with current board members. But Kyle Shipp is one of those folks who you would like to put forward, you wanted to put forth on the board, and he has expressed interest in stepping in the role of the town alternate, and that in the alternate for, so if you went with the suggestion from staff would be to elevate Steve, his appointment would run to the end of the year, because that's the seat for Beth, and then the alternate would run to 2020, because Steve was just reappointed in January.
So for 2020, you're looking for new applications
for that particular seat.
For Steve's?
Yeah.
Steve, good.
Yes. Yeah. Or you could do something totally different if you have other folks that you want to fill in. That's totally your appointment.
I very much like staff's suggestion. I'm eager to hear from other board members.
I personally know Steve Cockman. He lives right here on Main Street, and I've been a resident here in Pittsburgh for years, so he has my full support.
I think Steve's a regular as an alternate, so he stays up with it.
He is, and he has had to sit 4 board members, and he probably more times than not, so he's accustomed to that.
And I know that Kyle is coming to the meetings as well and staying up to speed.
Yes. If he's going to come, we might as well use him.
Well, agreed. I'll just mention one person who expressed interest to me that I think would be exceptionally valuable, and that's Jim Nass. So he was thinking if applications were requested, he would put one in.
So, would not argue with that.
Right.
So what we could do is put out a couple of weeks of advertisement for positions. We're going to have to do that for the ETJ member and come back to you. That's totally something we can do. We can operate with what we have now without an appointment.
No appointments don't really expire over time.
They-
They expire when they're replaced.
Right. In this case, we have 2 resignations, which those are gone. So
So then alternates are filling.
we do.
And one thing to consider is, it does seem like the whole idea of an alternate is to have someone to fill in if somebody leaves. But, so it kind of makes sense for him to become the person, but maybe Jim Ross would be willing to be an alternate.
Is Mr. Knox within or without?
I think he's within.
Yeah.
And there may be others who I know have expressed interest in the past who, if there was an advertisement for appointment, might apply as well. Totally up to you all.
What's the pleasure of the board?
Personally, I would like to see Steve stay in town since he has been coming to the board's meetings. Kind of a slap in the face, not to, why would he be coming to as an alternate? He's not going to possibly move up into a spot on the board.
What's the board that? I wouldn't describe it that way, but if you serve,
Well, he
you
might
serve
on
well.
that sometimes. He might think of that, he's been
Do we need a motion or anything? I make a motion to continue with the 2 alternates on the board.
So with Steve in the current position and have Kyle come on as alternate?
Yes, ETJ, correct? No, he's on the-
Kyle is in town. So
Mr. Schiff is a
they
property
would,
owner.
they're essentially neighbors. They would be taking each other's
Right.
position.
I think that works. I think Jim would be happy to be an alternate for some time.
I second the motion.
So did we?
So the motion is that we would elevate Steve Cochran from an alternate in town
Okay.
to a sitting board member,
Okay.
and that we would place on the board Jim Noss and Kyle
We
Schiff
got one.
as,
We only have one alternate.
okay, one alternate for the
Yeah.
town.
So Kyle would be the
So
alternate.
Kyle Schiff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We could look at expanding the alternates, because right now we have one alternate for in-town. We have one alternate for ETJ. That would need to be an ordinance change, so we
Yeah, I
can
think
take a
Jim
look
would
at that.
he'd put in his application whenever the opportunity presented.
Well, good.
That'd be great, no doubt.
There's going to be appointments at the end of the year that you all are going to have to make. They stagger. So if he wants to work on affordable housing for a little while and get groomed on that, then he could be on the planning board maybe next year this time. Okay.
But we still need an out-of-town.
You will,
alternate.
and I think it's just hard to get an ETJ member. So if you know someone who lives in the ETJ who would like to be on the planning board, this is a great opportunity for them to be an alternate, to get the packet materials, to come to meetings, to sit if there's an absence, and let me know. I'm going to put it on the website and put the application out there. So if you know somebody, let me know.
And when again are we expecting to see that from the UDO, which contains the section on planning board?
Whenever Clarion gets their act together and
Oh.
gets stuff to us.
It was summer at one point, we were thinking.
Oh, yeah. I think as each day goes on, that June timeframe is going to go by the wayside.
Oh,
I know.
Does the UDO make a provision for joint public hearings with the planning
No,
board?
I think that would be a new concept that we would want to put forward.
Well, and I think we've talked about that for a long time.
Yeah.
When there, as there was tonight, no public expression during a public hearing.
Right.
It does make it perhaps a little harder to ask planning board members to come.
Right.
But I honestly think it's going to save staff time. You're having to explain what it is that happened at the public hearing all the time.
Yeah.
Or
We can work what the parameters are on that. when we go through that process.
We have a motion.
We have a motion on the floor, which is to move Steve Cockman, who is a current alternate, into a regular planning board member, and that Kyle Shipp would serve as the in-town alternate. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Congratulations. Motion carries.
Okay.
We have next on the agenda is the Chatham Park Master Plan text amendment, additional elements of public art and transit.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the board. So the plan is to sort of skip ahead a little bit out of sequence that we've been normally going, which was to take the second set of elements, which included stormwater and tree protection. Those are the two out of that second set that we're still working on. We hired consultants to help us out with that, and we will be back whenever that work is done. So not to delay movement on other elements that might be something that we can get through, we're going to put forth the public art element and the transit element. This is part of the third set of elements, which includes affordable housing and public facilities. We've been working on this for a while now. The Additional Elements Committee presented their recommendations back in May. There was a public hearing in August. We had a workshop on the third set of elements back in October. From that workshop, Chatham Park made changes. Those changes were given to the town in November. Planning Board made their recommendation at their January meeting to go forward with the public art, public facilities, and the transit element. They're holding back on the affordable housing until some things get worked out at the either through the task force or other folks who are meeting on affordable housing. So you all have in front of you or in your packet the original element, and then you have the track changed version. And these two elements are relatively small in page numbers. The public art plan has changed a lot if you look at the red line version to describe what art is, what type of art is, and how implementation of art in Chatham Park would go. If we go back to our workshop, we talked about public and private art and how there might be a desire from the community to influence public art, and how on the private side that would be more driven from a developer or business owner. So part of public art includes things like this. That I don't know how that shows up. It looks pretty good straight on. You all may have seen this. It was at our workshop back in October. And this is the roundabout at Russet Run. And this is public art that Chatham Park is proposing. Right now, Russet Run is under DOT control. And there's some discussion between DOT and the town of the town taking over Russet Run. And part of the impetus to do so would be able to allow for public art in the roundabout. DOT says that there's a possible way of doing that through and staying in a DOT right of way, but it's convoluted, and the town still has to sign on to maintain it and maintain, which under the scenario that we've talked about with Chatham Park is that the town would take over Russet Run. We would go through the motions of allowing this somehow through you all agreement, and that they would maintain it and maintain the landscaping and such. So that's going to be a future item on the agenda of a resolution to take over Russet Run and some legal language of maintenance that Chatham Park will maintain. Stormwater devices and this potential art piece. So I just wanted to put that to you before Chatham Park gets up, and if you all have any questions for them. Again, take it wherever you want to tonight. Chatham Park's here to answer any questions that you have. And I can answer any that I may be able to.
Can I ask just a question about how this was put together? I'm not seeing that the Elements Advisory Committee recommendations have been incorporated yet into the red line version. Is that correct?
Well, there may not be some of those. So that's questions that you would go to Chatham Park on.
Okay.
Because what I've given you is Chatham Park's responses.
Yes, in the bold print.
Right. And if there are things that they may or may not have done, then I think that's the appropriate question back to them.
Okay.
And that response covered all 4 elements of that third set.
Well, shall we take the public art first? And who's going to speak to that?
I can speak on everything from sewer to roads to
Public art. Tim Smith at Chatham Park, and we reviewed this at your workshop in October, and it hasn't changed significantly, and this final copy was November the 29th. So if you go in your pamphlet to the green title there, that's the way it reads now. Basically, it's set up in public art and just art on private property, and that's the way it's set up. Public art would come to you for any approvals or a committee that you set up, and then back to you for approval, such as something like this that's in a right-of-way or a park or any publicly owned land. Anything that's owned privately owned land would go through the Chatham Park Art Advisory Committee that we would set up and approve. Be glad to answer any questions on that.
Yeah, well, may I start that the recommendation number 2 by the advisory committee sought some language to make it more clear in objective number 3 to preclude single-family, preclude single-family residential lots, and you said you'd revise it to make that more clear. So is what we have here your revision to make it more clear?
Yes.
Okay. With respect to number 3, which was to add the word outdoor, section 2, objective 1.2a, I didn't see that perhaps I have the wrong one.
I'm not sure that
question was, we dealt with.
Word outdoor.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was necessary because art is outdoors. I mean, it's what all art is. So I'm not sure you have to add outdoor to it.
Okay.
Well, plus you list various art forms, and some of them are outdoors, so, yeah.
All right. Since you have, since you've already formed your since you indicate that you'll form your committee once things move along, and you say that as the project grows, there was some question about who would be serving on that board. Is it possible to put in language that says that as you move towards that, that you would provide, that the committee would have broad representation, including the Arts Council, the Arts Guild, the Art Incubator, etc.? Is that possible to make that kind of broad statement addition?
I think on public art, you will appoint a committee and you will include all those. On art on private property,
Okay.
really it's just a developer committee decision as to what looks good on the private property. We can't have too many involved in that.
I understand that it makes it more cumbersome to have too many people on your committee. But I'd like to think that Chatham Park is going to be integrated into the town of Pittsburgh, and we want Chatham Park to reflect local culture. And that is my biggest problem with the public art. I'm so glad you have one, and I'm glad that you're including art, so I want to say thank you for that. But I think it would also be great to have some representatives from local artists, even on the more corporate board, just to make sure that what you're doing has that local flavor to it, and that someone with an artistic bent is a part of these decisions and not just corporate. We want Chatham Park to reflect the culture of Pittsburgh, and I think that that's a way to make sure that happens.
I mean, it's possible. We haven't set up that committee yet, but it's possible.
But even just to say that on the committee will be a member of the Arts Council, a member of the Artists Guild, something along those lines, but that it's just a given that someone from the artist community will be on that board, even though not just the public, but also for the private.
Well, this is private art. So if you have a business and you want to put a statue on the front of your business, then the developer has the right to say yes or no. I'm not sure that's up to other people.
We're just talking about somebody providing input. They wouldn't have, just we're talking about one or two votes in our committee. But, you think about our ordinances, we require certain things of private buildings, even though so this is an ordinance. And an ordinance sometimes requires you to do things that aren't decided by the corporations, they're decided by the town. And to me, this is an ordinance, and therefore we have some say about the art that is put up in the town of Pittsburgh. It's just like the other ordinances. We have say about how you do landscaping, we have some say about how you do this and that. And to me, the art piece is the same.
I disagree. Art on private property is a personal matter. If you want to put a statue in front of your house, as long as it doesn't involve a site plan, you're free to do it.
So you think that should be true of landscaping? That you should just be able to do what you want and not just the town should?
Landscaping is part of the restricted covenants of the neighborhood that you live in. I don't think the town's going to come to you and say you can't put a boxwood in front of your house, right?
Right.
So it's restricted covenants. We'll have restricted covenants that cover.
We're not talking about houses. We're talking about buildings and commercial buildings and things like that. I think it just doesn't help you to have someone from the arts community on your committee. That's not a lot to have.
I'm not saying we won't have it. I just don't want to demand that I have somebody from those. But we will have artists on those committees.
I just want to make sure your public art plan involves local artists and your local artists.
It certainly will. And that's why we divided it up into public art and private art. Private art is a privilege of the property that you buy. You can put private art.
I'm not asking you to make everybody on the committee an artist. I'm just asking for one or two artists guaranteed on that committee. That's not a lot to have. How's the rest of the board feel about that?
I agree. This is the public art additional element, and we're engaged in a public policy process. And I think it's a very reasonable request to make that there be some representation of from the local artist community.
I think that would benefit the committee to have some artistic input.
We will have artists on there. I just don't want to be dictated who I put on there. But we will have artists and architects and all sorts of people on there.
It's fascinating to me that you're using the word dictate when I don't think anybody on this board has suggested that.
Well, then leave it open that I can have any artist from anywhere on there then.
I've heard it very recently.
Hard to believe that you would be object to having someone from the Arts Council or the Arts Guild on the committee.
Well, it's similar to we're going to have a homeowners committee that goes over the restricted covenants. I don't want to be told who I can put on my homeowners committee. I mean, it's sort of a private thing.
Well, that's your business, but we're talking about a town ordinance here. So the town is even. It's like I'm saying. There are other ordinances. I just think that I'm not asking a lot. I'm asking for you to have local artists, at least 1 to 2, on your board. And I don't think that's too much to ask. And the fact that you're objecting really worries
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Me too.
I just don't want to have it in a ordinance that I have to put a specific person on a privately controlled board. It'd be like a homeowner's board.
I haven't heard anything specific. I've heard a suggestion there be a person, a representative from the arts community. I think you could have language as vague as that, and I think it would satisfy this board. And it is striking that you are objecting so strenuously to something that is a very reasonable request. But I hear your concern. And I'm asserting that nobody is dictating a particular person.
Or particular art. We're just saying we want to make sure that the town of Pittsburgh, that Chatham Park is going to be part of Pittsburgh. We have a wonderful artist community here. And I would think, wow, you're so fortunate to have so many artists to choose from in this community that can provide you some wonderful input. And I don't know why in the world you would not take advantage of this rich community of artists that we have here.
Okay, we will put somebody from the local community, okay, we will put 2 on this committee.
You're opening up for a lawsuit. I'm a taxpayer. Let's don't have a lawsuit over a damn statute.
So I had some concerns about the public art element in that it's not entirely clear to me who pays for what where. So can you help me understand that better, Mr. Smith?
Anything on private property would be paid for by whoever puts it up. Anything on public property could be paid for by, example, the town. The Art Council could come and propose to you because it's a public circle, public right-of-way. If you want to put something in a park, anybody could pay for it. I will assume that Chatham Park's homeowners or the developer or whoever, society or whatever, would raise money and propose a piece of art like this, which they would pay for and put on. And they would come to you, and just like Jeff stated here, that you could approve it if you like it, whatever, and then they, of course they'd have to maintain it and do all that stuff. So it just depends on who places it. But anything on private property would certainly be paid for by the private owner.
I think that's clear enough and reasonable enough.
Yeah, we're going to have certain designations throughout Chatham Park where art will work. It's just, do we want to pay for it, or does the town want to pay for it? Or us? And Cary, they had Cary Visual Arts Society. They had a ball, black tie ball. They raised money, and they put art all over town. That's all paid for by donations through the art ball. So we could have something like that that would work.
I think we need to have some language that addresses those questions.
Addresses what? How it's funded?
Who pays for what, in which places, and where?
How would you address that, Mr. Eagle? I'm not sure how you address that. I mean, whoever proposes it would pay for it. So if nobody proposed anything, it wouldn't be paid for.
Who pays for it?
Who pays for which art? In the public, there's 2 sections, public and private.
Yeah.
Who pays for what and where?
Well, I mean, clearly private pays for private.
Yeah, that's what.
Why not just say, that's what you're saying?
Yeah, we just need to be specific.
Well, in this case, private's paying for public.
Right. Yes.
We're basically saying anybody can pay for anything. I mean, why do you need to put that in words?
No requirement. If it's not funded, it's not going to happen.
Kenny over here from Chatham Park. I understand what Mr. Bonnet's is saying, but it is one of those things that probably goes without saying. If the town wants to fund an art project, the town's going to fund one and put it on the town property. And that'll be up to this board. If a private person wants to donate money to the town, the private person can do that. If the town or a private person wants to recommend a work of art like that, put in on town property, then this board's going to have to approve it. Or
some of the original conversations we had about public art was like that developers would pay a percentage that would go towards public art. And now we're getting away from that they're doing private and we're doing public. But I think that's where there's some confusion, because that was what we originally, a long time ago, we were talking about.
You need to give it back to me.
Well, can I speak to that? Yeah, what you're talking about normally is called a percent to the art. That's a town-wide sort of ordinance or policy. We're not talking about a town-wide situation here. We're talking about Chatham Park. So we aren't getting into requirements where we're in our proposal, we're requiring that art be on site. So the funding of that is taking place privately. But Mr. Fioco's project has experienced that with Penguin Place. So we are dedicating funds with each site that goes to art without specifying an amount.
So there's not really a specific, in your version of it, there's not a specific requirement to produce art. So I'm not sure why there's an ordinance if we're not requiring something specific.
Well, the way I had always envisioned public art was, it was art on private developments that was visible or could be experienced from the public realm. That was the idea. So honestly, it was all private. You can put, there's nothing to stop the town for putting a piece of art from publicly owned property, from taking a gift from an artist, from managing its own land. This idea was putting art that could be experienced by the general public on private projects, in my mind.
So what's the criteria? Like, to me, there's nothing here that says, it sounds like that it's completely open and they'll just do it when they feel like it, or there's no requirement. That's what I'm trying to understand.
You're getting to a good point, and I heard Chuck say that he has language that requires it, but...
Objective 3, number 2. All non-residential projects in Chatham Park will be required to submit an art statement by detailing architectural and/or site treatments, which will be included in development plans to address art considerations. So we're requiring them to include that with each non-residential site.
So
there's no numbers.
I got that, and I read it, but I am coming to the same conclusion that I don't find language that describes if or when art is actually to be incorporated. Because I can imagine somebody presenting an art statement and it going no further, it not be realized in the development. And I know that you're talking up here about this board, this nonprofit, creating policies for art, but I honestly don't find anything in here that says art will be part of a project, or part of every third project, or part of a project that has more than 20,000 square feet, or something. I don't find language that says it will be required.
Yeah. It's very vague.
Well, I'll say number 2 is intended to say that when it says all non-residential. If it's not clear enough, we can work on the language to make it clear.
I think it would be appropriate. I certainly would feel like we've accomplished the objective of getting public art in Chatham Park, or art that's visible to the public, can be experienced by the public in Chatham Park. I know it's the intent, but honestly, just having an art statement doesn't put it in the project.
Well, so far we're 2 for 2.
It might not always be you. You guys are doing great. This is a local artist, Edwin White, and I really love what you're doing. But my concern is 30 years from now, when we're all retired, there needs to be writing so there's no confusion about it. Just to make
if you think this is not clear enough, that's what we will make that clear.
Thank you.
I only have 2 points, so I'll make my second point. And for many of us in this room, I just have to invoke the Randy Bowler image.
Not a statue, I hope.
Yeah, well, that's what we were talking about. And I don't see anything in here that gives the town any ability to disallow a piece of private art. And it seems to me that there could be such an egregious disagreement on what is art that the town should have some ability to control the environment. It is real tricky, and I have struggled and tried to think of a reasonable solution, because I completely respect and want to honor the private citizen's right to express art. I really want to do that. But I know that there could be something that just would be so inappropriate that somebody thinks is art, and that the rest of the community would absolutely be devastated.
If you hope that having a committee, then maybe that would be avoided.
Well, what I thought, and I'll throw this out, that the public art concept comes to this board. And this board has only one way to deny it, and that's unanimous.
You want to?
I'll have to refer to Mr. Messick. I don't think you can dictate art. I think that's the Second Amendment, and I don't think you can do it, and I would be in favor of it.
First Amendment.
Correct.
There's no talk about
The Second Amendment, please. Paul, I mean, does that just go too far?
I think so.
Yeah, not the Second Amendment.
It may be illegal,
Free speech.
you know, in terms of obscenity, but short of that,
Obscenity, right.
then I think taste is in the eye of the beholder.
I know.
There are some rules. There is, if anybody gets into Asheville and seen the graffiti warehouses. Have anybody seen those? They're wonderful. It's like they're these giant warehouses. They're completely covering graffiti art, and there's certain rules. You can't do something that's offensive or, just blatantly vulgar.
What's
You're
that
not allowed to
definition?
do something that's copyrighted. There's a few criteria that
Knows it when she sees
you
it.
have to go by. It's like 3 or 4 things, which I could give you. But if you meet all those things, so far, even if it's graffiti art, there's nothing that I saw that was, there's some things that were on the line, but I think that those criteria, it can't be copyrighted, it can't be vulgar. I have to do the rest of the I think you can have guidelines.
Chatham Park has its own guidelines when it's on property. We'll have a committee. Now we'll have 2 local artists on it, and they're going to control. They can tell the person what to do. It'll be through restrictive covenants.
Yeah.
So it's not the town's obligation to do that. You got to put faith in the citizens that live there that they're going to watch after their neighborhood. So.
And I respect the idea of exercising human judgment. And I just think it would be a shame that this town doesn't have the ability to exercise human judgment as well when we're talking about the environs of the town.
I don't think you can do that.
I'm one to take the risk that we're going to get great things. And the risk is, of course, you get a couple of not so great things. So I lean that way. But I really find it hard to think that a town would have zero say in expression that is experienced by citizens in the town.
You have zero say right now if anybody wants to put something in their front yard, correct?
Depends on what that thing is.
You can't. If someone wants to put a statue in their front yard, you have no right to. The town has no rules, regulations, no right to say that art's not acceptable. I hear you. You just have to trust Chatham Park Advisory Committee. I don't think they're going to let anything go in there. That'll be through the restrictive covenants.
Maybe if you had guidelines, that we could review those and to see if there's anything that we could speak like it. Would that make you feel better if you saw guidelines?
Guidelines change.
But if you say it's not going to be vulgar, your definition of vulgar can be different from your definition of vulgar and your definition of vulgar.
Yeah, and obscene.
And obscene.
But I think that a private building is not going to do something so awful because it would drive away business. They're going to do something
That's exactly
safe.
right.
That's the biggest objection to private art, is it tends to be very safe.
That's exactly right.
They're not going to do anything to hurt their business.
A controversial piece of art is just going to drive away business.
Right, they're not
That's
gonna do
exactly
it.
right.
I do have one request. There's no language in here that recommends use of public art when possible. And I know that I don't want to limit use of public art, but there seems that there should be some mention about using local art when possible, or when something.
Using local art.
I mean, local. What did I say?
Public.
Local art. To reflect.
We're expressing a preference for local when possible, when feasible.
It's not always, there are not so many large sculptural artists here, but I'd like to see Chowder Park supporting local artists. And
We are and we will.
I know.
I don't want that made a requirement that
I'm
we
not
have to
saying-
use a
I
local
wasn't-
artist.
I wasn't suggesting requiring you to use local art. I was just saying I'd like to see it somewhere in here that gives a nod to local artists.
And say what? They get first choice, or we're going to look at them first, or we're going to use them 1 out of 3 times? I mean, I don't know how you do
Maybe, I
that.
don't know, maybe you put a percentage on it?
There's quite a few artists in the country that, send us brochures and
Sure.
different things to use, which are beautiful.
Mhm.
Just to rely on a Chatham County artist is tough.
I'm not saying 100%, I'm just saying maybe 20%. And I'd love for you to go around and visit some of the artists that are here. There's really such a wealth. I mean, you can't believe the talent that's here in this community.
It's true.
We're using. Penguin Place has it. This one's got it.
I don't know, what does the board think about that? Some kind of language that encourages the use of at least some local art.
I think you've been very clear in a policy level direction, and I think that Chatham Park investors can take that guidance, if this board is in agreement, and come up with their own language. Because we don't want to be dictatorial, but we would very much like you to give consideration to local artists.
We do and we will.
That's great.
Just don't want
Put
to
it in writing.
be dictated. Do we have to use local artists?
We're not doing that. Nobody's doing that. We're asking you to give consideration and put it in language.
That's exactly what you're doing. I beg your pardon, but that is exactly
You're
what
telling us
doing.
we have to use those
By putting
artists.
these types of things in here, you're saying that. I mean,
No.
you are.
No.
Why, but how are you not saying that? if
Mr.
you
Eagle,
require
you are a
it?
master at crafting language that is
Not for that.
that
I think there
allows
may even be
for
constitutional
flexibility.
issues with things like that.
So
This is getting beyond the pale, really and truly.
we're not trying to dictate that you use exclusively Chatham.
It's exactly what you're trying to do,
I'm not even
Nicole.
asking you to require it.
What then are you saying?
I'm asking there to be some language in here
That
that says
does
you're
what?
going to support local artists when possible.
That the use,
What does that
the use
mean?
of local artists will be encouraged.
What does that mean when you play it out
Excuse me.
over a period of 10
Can you
years?
just lower your voice? I feel your tension. Can you just take a deep breath here for a minute? Let's get to a place
I'm
where
fine. You just tell me what you mean, and I'll
want
be
for us to do is
happy
have
to
a
hear it.
conversation about it and
I'm
figure out a
trying.
way.
Okay.
I'm really disturbed by this objection to using local artists.
It's not an objection to
So then
using,
why are you getting so worked up about
it's
it?
an
Let's just
objection
talk about it.
to you dictating that we have to do that.
I'm not dictating. I'm asking you, we've said, let's hear your words. We're asking you to use your language. What are your ideas on how we can incorporate local artists in creating public art in this community?
Our ideas are that if these artists in the local community are as good as you say they are, then they'll be used in Chapel Park. But for us to try to write something in there, I'm not sure how we would do it to satisfy you. I'm really not.
Well, maybe then we do need to do it. I just feel like that's not asking a lot. It's really not.
But I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, if
Could
you
you
would
just
live...
use the word suggested, or, not required, but suggested?
Can I make a suggestion?
Maybe Chuck has a suggestion.
If you said something to the effect that the use of local artists will be encouraged when artists placed in Chatham
Simple
Park.
enough. That's enough.
Thank you.
There's no requirement.
There's no requirement. Nobody's dictating.
And may I add to that, if you have a private business that's considering art, that if they're interested in seeing materials by the Artist Guild, by local artists, that they be provided with this information upon request. How about that? We have, the Artist Guild always has a catalog. How about that's made available to the private businesses so they can see the kind of art that's available? Is that agreeable? Not
Yeah,
requiring them to use it, but just for them to be aware of the talent that we have. Thank you.
I didn't know this was going to be so tough. I thought this was going to be the easy one. Art is in the eye of the beholder, you know, so it's a crazy one. Any more questions?
Chuck, would you give me your verbiage again? Local artists.
The use of local artists will be encouraged. That's not the complete sentence, but that phrase would be included in the sentence.
And I'm assuming that would be in the introductory section.
I'm thinking that a lot of, again, back to objective 3, number 2, that's where we get into really talking about the placement of art or the inclusion of art, that it would be included in the language of that number 2.
Just include that materials about local artists. And that we put that responsibility of the Artist Guild and Arts Council.
And I've written down your without having the language exactly right, but providing information from local artists guild and local artists.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Kim, I just have one little comment, and I've never seen one around here, but can you just give me an example of a bus shelter, art for a bus shelter?
A lot of them. We showed one in a, I don't think we got the picture, did we? But we showed one that's like it's a piece of art. It's covered so you can actually sit inside of it. It's a piece of art. One actually said bus, and it was letters, big letter bus, but you could sit inside the U and have a cover on it. So, I mean, it could be all sorts of art.
There's metal works, too, that you can make benches out of, and it gets into...
I guess I'm just used to seeing those square boxes in Chapel Hill.
We won't have any of those.
Plexiglass scratched all up.
No, we'll try to make them artistic. Thank you.
We can't guarantee that whatever we put out there on public space will not be scratched up.
Graffiti wrote on it, too.
Are we finished with questions on that? Yes? Okay. Next item would be the transit element. Questions from the board on the transit element?
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the transit, I know it says that if there's a multimodal transportation plan, but now, from what I've read here, it seems that you're going to be prepared for the future in reference to possibly high-speed rail. You will have areas which you won't have to tear up the entire street to be able to input those different types of modes of transportation. Is that correct, from what I'm reading in here?
Well, I'm not going to say, if it's specifically high-speed rail, I'm not going to say that something will not be torn up to do that.
Okay.
That's pretty intrusive.
Well, the reason
what we're thinking of that's going to be more likely to happen is, what we mentioned before, is BRT, bus rapid transit, and that's really happening more and more around the country because of the expense of light rail. And so if you would like to see an example, the closest example is in Richmond, Virginia. And they are having to take up part of the public right-of-way to include but there are stations that you would build, but instead of a light rail train driving up beside it, a bus is driving up beside it. So, but it's still within the road right-of-way. That's the sort of thing we're contemplating, and that's the sort of thing that we have been part of regional transportation alliances and groups that are working in that direction. That's more on the transit end of the multimodal possibilities.
But you, from what I'm reading, you will be allowing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we aren't going to be running a bus service, but
Right.
we are trying to incorporate the use of those kind of modes of transportation.
And I was wanting to ask, in section 4 of pedestrian accommodation, where it talks about sidewalks, the combination of sidewalks,
Yes, ma'am.
multi-use path. Now, what type of material are you planning for that to be? Is that going to be pavement? Is that going to be dirt, gravel?
Yeah, when we use that term, that term is normally when you take a 5-foot sidewalk, and because of its the need to say join two greenways that are off the road, and you have to come alongside the road to connect those two greenways. There are a few places that we already envision, just from our internal planning, the need to do this. But instead of a 5-foot sidewalk, you're widening the sidewalk to 10 feet, and it would be concrete. So it's basically a wider sidewalk in the location where the sidewalk would be, and there may need to be an additional easement width to accommodate that extra 5 foot of width for the sidewalk. But when we do that, we call it a multi-use path.
Okay, thank you. I do have one more about the greenway. With the green, page 104, well, there's 104 here. Greenway locations. And it says greenways will be constructed with asphalt, but may utilize alternative materials. What type are you envisioning in that?
Well, our greenways are going to typically be asphalt, and but there are situations, as we've been dealing with the state, particularly along the Haw River, and particularly as we incorporate trails that are within their property. They in many instances do not want paved trails. There are a number of situations too where you have runners who prefer to run on soft surface trails. And so we're not trying to say, if we came in here and told you that every trail is going to be soft surface, then I think people would be upset because every trail is soft surface. So we're trying to say that typically we're going to be paving with asphalt, but there would be those other trails to take into consideration, those user groups that would, and it could be, bike, off-road bike trails as well. So that's the language we tried to use to allow that to happen without saying that's the predominant material that we would be using.
So those might be gravel or sand or... And
you've seen, if you've been on American Tobacco Trail, they've got a portion that's just because of equestrian. I don't know that we're going to be doing that, but there are different materials depending on the use. And without trying to, again, I think the trail that we are, I think is moving in a direction of having a trail on the Haw River. I can see that parts of that in certain locations would be a different material from asphalt.
Yeah, the tobacco trails, a lot of it, are, like you said, aren't paved, and they're actually nice. They're nice and firm. They're great.
Now, when you take over, when you take on the maintenance of something, there's more maintenance required just to keep it great.
Yeah.
That's why people, kind of gravitate to asphalt, because the life cycle costs are much lower.
No, I wasn't objecting to alternatives.
No, I understand. I didn't
I
take
was
it
just
that way.
wanting to...
Yeah, just to hear what
you were thinking.
Well, I think the asphalt makes it that much more accessible.
Well, you start getting, when you have babies in strollers and, pushing that or jogging with those sort of things, I mean, obviously, hard surface is a whole lot easier to deal with that.
Other questions from the board?
In parking, pedestrian connectivity, you're currently using language.
Where are we?
Page 14.
Excuse me.
Original, I think.
Excuse me, Commissioner Lott, the pages, I'm sorry, I apologize for this, but the paging the numbering didn't come out like it was supposed to. I didn't realize it when this draft was submitted. So there's really not that many pages. There's not a page 14.
Okay, so
the last page is really page 7. So if you could pick out a section number, it might help.
Section 4,
okay.
Pedestrian accommodations.
So if you got that.
I'm getting there.
That would be at the bottom of page.
Yeah, I've got pedestrian accommodations, just exactly where.
Pedestrian connectivity. Did that get removed?
I don't see anything that has been edited to remove that. I don't see it though.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it either. Where'd it go? Well, anyway, the language was each VUA parking area shall be designed.
That's either going to be in the parking and loading or in landscaping. One or the other.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm remembering. All right. So let me just step away from the language for a moment and go to the concept here. The Walmart up there at the edge of the county on 15501, every time I drive past that, almost every time, I see folks walking in from local neighborhoods to do their shopping at this Walmart. And it makes me so upset to be fearful for their safety as they're walking in, and also trying to put myself in their shoes, thinking about what it's like to walk to a facility that's designed completely for vehicular access, where even the pedestrian element of the parking area is focused on getting people to and from cars, not getting that flow of pedestrians that we hope we're going to be creating in Chatham Park. And the language, it may already be stuck because we've approved the parking element, but the idea that pedestrians should be accommodated, pedestrianism should be accommodated, is where I'm going with these concerns. So I'm not sure exactly how to suggest that in terms of editing the text, but do you have some thoughts in response, Chuck?
I have a couple thoughts. One thought, we'll see if it turns into a couple. But this was dealt with in the landscape element. And I don't have the language in front of me, but I know that one of the things we did, because I agree with your concern and the concept, we have set up a standard that you can have no more than 3 bays of traffic before you have a median that runs parallel to that run of traffic. 3 lanes of parking before you have a 10-foot wide median that separates then the next bay that would allow connectivity from the street. So we put in design considerations in there that would allow that to happen.
Now that's in parking.
That's right.
And is there a way for us to contemplate that in a higher level where we're saying that pedestrianism will be given consideration on par with vehicular access as a part of our transit program, or something along those lines?
Just looking specifically at this element, when we look at saying the sidewalks are going to be on both sides of the street, I think you only require those on one side of the street down here in town. So that's automatic. We're automatically exemplary. Yeah, we're automatically exemplary. If we do nothing else than that. We're talking about the concept of the multi-use trail taking the place of a sidewalk. So I think that's a step up in standards.
Okay.
And although we haven't gotten to the small area plan yet, I think when you see, if you haven't, the Greenway plan that's included in that, just for the North Village, and how connectivity is provided for pedestrians and bikers within the roadways. And I don't know, I was at the connectivity workshop the other morning that Paul and David had. And that's, you know, it's interesting that the biking community is not necessarily completely on board with bike lanes within the roadway anymore. And I know you're probably more familiar with this than I am, but that's, I think, because of the we're concerned. We want our off-road system to be robust enough to be able to handle biking. Someone's going to be able to still be in the roadways. We're still providing the bike lanes, but we want those trails to be the system to be strong enough that use is taken care of off-road. Because my concern too is a lot when you have something like the Walmart up on the county line. To me, it's more of an issue of walking along 15501. I mean, if you don't feel safe to do that, you're not going to even get to the point of getting to the parking lot to walk.
But it's also orientation of the building.
Oh, there's all kinds of things that go into
access,
that.
No entrance access that would be friendly to someone walking. So, yeah. Well, I think you've heard my points, and I appreciate very much your responses. I think they are spot on.
Would it be helpful, John, on page 104, in the paragraph that talks about typical locations and width of sidewalks to be determined in the small area plan, with final details to be determined at the time of development plan approval? I was just wondering would it address your concern to have the words with the goal of connectivity and encouragement of pedestrian use? Would something like that be?
Yes.
Would that kind of wording help out?
Yes, I think so.
Where have you been all along in this process of suggesting this kind of language? I mean, that's good stuff.
It is.
I mean, where have you been? We needed it. Can you state it again? So I'm writing.
At the end of development plan approval, it would have a comma, with the goal of connectivity and encouragement of pedestrian use.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And at the end of, I was writing it down, at the end of which sentence?
Well, it's really the first sentence on page 104. Typical locations and widths. It's at the end of that sentence.
Development plan approvals?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Other questions?
I've got one that's very close to what was just being discussed about pedestrian connectivity, bicycle connectivity, and really being exceptional. One of the things that I think would be exceptional and recognize it when I have the opportunity to experience it is having built-in grade separations. And I would love it if this would include language for bike and pedestrian separation, so that, you know, where there's an opportunity to have a tunnel or a roadway, that would be great, so that I don't have to intersect with the automobile.
I don't know if this is back to the encouragement versus requirement language.
It really is.
But
it's not a requirement. It's
I
like, let's
know.
look for those
I mean,
opportunities.
we're already in a couple of situations looking at that.
Yeah.
Because in some cases, just because of the difference in grade change, you need enough grade change to be able to accommodate it. To the situations where I've been in where you try to retrofit it or you try to include it, when you really get into a proper street paving cross section and then the utilities that are under that, you've got to allow. There's got to be enough allowance. Yeah, and then, but also the other part of this that I believe in the concept, but I know that there's a lot more instances of crime.
There is a safety
And when you have a trail system, that's where it occurs, and sometimes it's because of the length of the crossing and how dark it is. Even if it's lit at night, it's more dangerous. But at the same time, we have a couple of situations that we're specifically looking at the alternatives because we are looking at getting underneath the roadway.
I would appreciate if the language would include that it is a goal or an aspiration to have those facilities. And it's a safety issue on one hand, and it's less of a safety issue on another. So,
well, I think with very low cost, low energy LED illumination now, the safety issue can be handled pretty easily.
I think there are other techniques that can mitigate the additional risk of that enclosed space.
Oh, you can help. I'm not saying that, but it's still that's the tough issue in that.
Consideration.
I think going back to the rails to trails, the way they do street crossings, it's not like you're going to accidentally suddenly run into a road that has little narrow things you have to navigate through to get to the road, so you know when you're coming to a road. So just features like that.
Oh yeah, there are certainly design tools that you use for it to be safe once you've decided you need to do that.
If it's got some of those safety features, then it doesn't necessarily have to go through a tunnel or things.
Other questions?
This is one more for Mr. Messick. Or has Mr. Jones left? No, excuse me. Help me understand, both of you, if you would please, your interpretation of the final sentence of Section 2, Transportation Impact Analysis. For purposes of development plan approval, construction or installation of the public infrastructure improvements recommended in the TIA will be deemed to adequately address the traffic impact of the proposed development.
Yeah, I've got that one marked too.
Where are you now? I'm sorry,
It's the
last sentence of Section 2, Transportation Impact Analysis.
I think it means that whatever the TIA says that needs to be improved, the developer should do that. But there's other improvements that board members or staff or the public want that's not called out in the TIA. That's not going to be on the developer. That might be something the town wants to do and take a look at, but that's not what the TIA is, the requirements of the developer. That's how I
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's correct. My notes from our workshop talked about reimbursements for improvements beyond requirements of the TIA.
That could be an agreement, a development agreement at the time of that particular development.
Like we like a grade separated tunnel right here, but the TIA doesn't require it. Right.
It could be credits or something given.
To the extent that this addresses a TIA that's been furnished by the developer, as opposed to anybody else's TIA, there might be some difference of opinion about that. I mean, if they submit a TIA by Kimley Horn or whoever, and the town decides that it wants to have it reviewed by some other traffic consultant, and it comes up with a different conclusion, then perhaps that needs to be addressed here as well. I think this contemplates a developer TIA.
But I will say we did add the sentence that, based on comments from the workshop or whenever we last talked about this, that a scoping meeting would be held with the town engineering staff to determine any additional study area that's needed for the TIA. So that was added. I don't know that it completely addresses what you're talking about, but that language was added to make it less of a developer-driven traffic study, and the town is included in the definition of that.
Well, I think there's so much language in here as development plan, site plan, subdivision plan. It doesn't say because the developer submits it that that's the plan, because it will all be approved by the town, including the TIA. And I think we presently are using 3 firms on call to perform those functions, to review TIAs.
Right.
And so, yeah,
That would hopefully be worked out between staff.
Yeah. I mean, it's a technical, very technical piece of work.
Well, some of it, it is, but, I'll tell you, I don't want to say we haven't talked about this. I have been more concerned as I've watched this Powell Place conversation go on, and we're getting ready to make improvements on 15501, many of which are required because of things that we have not caused, that aren't part of our traffic generation. And I'm thinking of the traffic signal next to Powell Place, and they aren't going to be contributing to that at all. And I know you've struggled with the fact that they may not be required to do a traffic study, or they may not be, so we're doing these things. I mean, I realize you may want us to go further with some of this. I really feel like we're meeting the intent of what our obligation should be. Particularly when, and maybe you're going to get to that in your UDO. I mean, I know we haven't gotten there yet, but I sure hope so, because right now we're the only ones that, and we're making improvements based on the commitments made in the master plan. I hope, to me, you will never catch up or stay caught up if others are not going to be doing that too. I'll get on my soapbox.
Other questions?
I have a question about the, on page 105, about the primary bus trolley loop. And you said that the master plan calls for support of that. Are you saying that Chatham Park will pay for that trolley?
No, not at all.
Okay, I just want to clarify.
In the master plan, there is a route shown for that loop. That loop goes through downtown, but at the same time, that's Chatham Transit that would be providing whatever that vehicle is, and we're just accommodating for that vehicle and the design of our roadways.
Could be a private trolley that they have in Savannah.
Could be. Y'all could. Jay could start a business where he's running people around on the back of a
horse and buggy.
I just wanted to clarify that, so nobody would say, oh yeah, Chatham Park should also pay for that.
Okay, we got a good idea. Burley's on the go.
Yeah.
Well, we haven't gotten into the affordable housing conversation, but everything that Chatham Park is required to pay for makes the price of a house go up. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we.
No, I didn't say I want to require you to pay for it.
Yeah,
And I had one question about the reimbursement. Are you anticipating putting these costs in for public street improvements into the SAD, the Special Assessment District?
No, I don't think this language doesn't have anything to do with the special assessment. Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know why it would. This is more dealing with the developer agreement that you'll be dealing with at some point. But we, is contemplating those situations where we have overbuilt something at your request and not looking for reimbursement for the entire cost, but we may be building a roadway that takes 10% more cost because of some need of something else, and just that would be reimbursed. Similar to oversizing sewer lines to accommodate property outside of Chatham Chatham Park.
So you'll be seeking that reimbursement from the town?
If it's oversized or
it's not just our normal stuff.
Scope or something.
Right, yeah. But the TIA identifies that we need to be adding a turn lane off-site. We are responsible for that. Without reimbursement.
Further questions, or are we going in here? So what substantive changes have we made?
Well, I've come up with 2 changes that you've asked for. One was yours, and I've written that. The second one was grade separated crossings be encouraged, and we can include that. It seems to me it's close enough that
I'm just wondering if we could pass this with the proviso that language be put in, or do we have language about the grade separations, or do we?
I hadn't written anything up, just that it was a goal of the project to incorporate grade separated facilities when possible, when practicable.
And Commissioner Fiocco, do you mean only at crossings or?
No, it could be mid
parallels or?
Oh yeah, yeah. Does not just grade separated, not only at intersections, obviously.
Well, I want to make sure I understand that, because I don't know, when you first mentioned this, I started thinking something different too. I mean, I understand grade separated road crossings or rail crossings and things like that. Grade separate, if we've got a road though that's at this elevation and you want the adjacent bike lane or pedestrian lane or whatever it is being at a different grade from the adjacent road if it was parallel. That's
if it's parallel? No.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I mean,
because I don't think
that would just be like a greenway or a multimodal path.
Right.
Yeah. No,
but if there's opportunities for it, are you still wanting to see that considered?
That separation is good.
Yes.
I'm away from the vehicles.
Yeah.
I'm talking about when they cross each other. So odds are that's not going to occur at an intersection, because that's a lot more
that's
infrastructure to deal with. It's going to happen at
it's usually going to happen at stream crossings.
Stream crossing, some other spot. And, you know, there will be opportunities that present themselves, and it will make sense. And I'm just saying I would like this element to acknowledge that it's going to look for those opportunities.
But again, let me clarify, you're wanting to see it at crossings only, or at crossings and other opportunities as they arrive based on
crossings is
geology?
No, the crossings are when you want to.
That's when the conflict occurs.
Right.
Well, conflicts occur. we go back to my admittedly poor use of the word macho, Commissioner Fiocco.
Well, there was another word used recently that I didn't realize I had, and that was attributable to me, the spandex class or something.
Who said that?
I don't know. I heard it recently. I think it might have been the Parks and Rec.
We're not going there in this
No,
element.
please don't.
At your age, too, it's really remarkable.
I'm up to wetsuit material.
I'm repulsed, but yet can't look away.
Right. Exactly.
What is that? That must be.
People do object to me at public art.
You should have Joe.
So I would say, I mean, one, I'm pretty clear on the other. What I would suggest is we,
Why don't you all get together on
but if you could pass this based on the approval of the language that we show you.
Oh, so you want to go ahead and write up the language, and then we'll...
No, I want you to vote based on subject to...
Vote tonight.
Well, we keep doing this for the next 5 years if you'd like.
I think we've got this one down specifically.
And at the next meeting, we'll simply review the language. If anyone has anything to say about it, we can speak it right there.
You and staff will see that language, since you're the one asking about it. You and staff will see that language before then, and before we finalize it.
I'll send up the smoke.
But, Chuck, I'm sorry, I don't recall if you were present for the prior discussion about 15501 and the Hillsborough Street project, were you?
I don't know if everyone, but I've been to a few.
So you heard some of my concerns about myself and people who I know who might get out with a stroller probably would be deterred from using a same road level bike lane. Whereas if there's a separation, grade level separation or just some other physical separation.
Well, you're going to have spatial separation, so you're already going to have that.
You've got that in the complete streets model, so.
Yeah, we've got that in our, Mr. Jones mentioned the cross sections that we have submitted the small area plan to, and we very specifically give a distance. Yeah, 8 feet.
Very good.
So I'll make a motion to approve of those two modifications.
Second. Moved by Michael Fielder, seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Motion carries unanimously. Is there any opportunity for doing the same thing with public art? So we don't have to come back to that. With the use of local artists will be encouraged. Terminology there in Objective 3. Or is there's going to be verbiage about the use of local artists would be encouraged, and materials provided from the local artists organizations.
I've got that to include in number 2, Objective 3, both of those points. We could do the same thing and let Ms. Foley see.
Could we?
Well, there was language that I was concerned about as to when development when art would be included in projects. And you'll recall there was a discussion about the art statement, and I didn't feel like the art statement in and of itself.
Yeah, well, that was part of the same. I was suggesting that to me it logically went in the same number 2 of Objective 3, and I'd already started writing things that. So that part of it I could let you see as well, because I think I do believe it's fairly simple to. Because in my mind we're doing it. You just don't think it's strong enough, or you'd like to see it a different way.
I'm not getting your intent. So others might not get that intent as well. So if we can shore that up, then I'll feel better about it.
So my usual email address is not working. I'm not getting.
So that's why you've been ignoring me.
So
I'll get it after the meeting.
okay.
I've got 3 things then.
Okay, so you'll come back with that specific.
So you're saying
language.
you don't want to do the same thing subject to the approval of that language, because it's changing number 2, and you will see that before.
Can we just narrow it and say that you'll bring number 2 back to us at the next meeting, and that should.
It should be very simple.
That should really pave the way for other.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We have 2 items from the consent agenda at this point. Consent item number 3 was removed in order to become new business item number 1, and this has to do with debt set-off program. I think John Bonnet is the one that...
Yes, I do have some concerns about this. So, I would simply like to ask staff or Mr. Griesbeck to report to us as to what are the current financial burdens or staff record-keeping burdens of the situation as it is. What's the cost? And then I would like to consider the proposal.
Could you better define maybe what you mean by burden?
How much in dollar value are we having to write off and not collect as a result of these debt set-ups?
Well, if I could just back up a little bit maybe, and this could help. What this does is after 90 days, we currently send past due, all accounts that are 90 days old. Those are almost 100% of the time accounts where someone has walked away from a residence and left town. It's not necessarily someone that is currently behind on their bills. So house forecloses if a landlord maybe isn't as attentive, tenant leaves with the bill, it's over 90 days. We currently send to collections. We get some of that back. We don't get a lot of it back. What this does is it would allow us to submit the unpaid amount essentially to the Department of Revenue, and then if someone that matches up that account owing has a refund, a tax refund due to them, that we, and in all likelihood probably other billers as well, would have access to whatever refund that they have, so that we could be made whole on an outstanding debt that hasn't been paid for any considerable amount of time. So that's what it's intended to do. It's not intended to be overly harsh on someone that's maybe experiencing financial difficulties or anything like that. It's just to kind of help the town remain solvent in its enterprise system.
Do we have a lot of these?
We have a few, but not as many as we used to, because I think we're doing a better job in working with people on payment plans and things like that. They generally won't go more than 30 days right now without having some sort of payment plan. So,
and if they move from one house to another, we get, will that bill follow them on our system?
we got to close out that account before they can open up a new account. And then sometimes I think the problem is, and this is why we kind of have this possible solution, is that oftentimes with rental properties, that the person either closes out the account or just walks away from it. And then we don't have any, especially if we're 90 days owing, those can add up over time. So.
I feel a little bit better about that. I was interpreting it as something that might affect people that were in a desperate condition, but I think given the explanation, these are people who have moved on and out of the town, makes me feel a little bit better.
Is it specific? I'm also still curious about amounts. Is it specific? Our policy is not limiting ourselves to folks who've left town.
Yeah, the accounts are almost 100% of the time. The accounts are going to be closed. I mean, I'd say about 100% of the time it's pretty closed. So, no, I don't have a dollar figure for you on that. And the board trusts staff to keep, to keep our revenues and our expenditures in place, and this is just another tool that we're proposing to use, as other communities do and other utility providers do, even in the private realm use. So it's nothing that, again, is, I know there's been a previous concern from members of the board that the town not appear overly harsh, and that we work with people, and that's what we've tried to do over the years. We've also, at the same time, been very successful in bringing our enterprise fund back into balance and into a positive position, especially compared to what it was when I first got here. So.
Any other questions on this? Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Bette Wilson. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. And then Michael Fiocco has asked that consent item number 2 come off and be examined under new business number 2. That's the budget amendment for the development C&L contract.
And I just wanted to get some comfort from Ryan and Paul that the contract is a suitable contract. And the reason I ask that is there's lots of language in here, boilerplate language about construction. And I'll read one section, it says engineers shall not at any time. This is for estimating our fees, right? Shall not at any time supervise, direct, control, or have authority over any constructor's work, nor shall engineer have authority over or be responsible for means, methods, techniques, sequences, or procedures of construction selected or used by any constructor. Huh. Really? I mean, is it? When I started reading that kind of language in here, I thought, it's just boilerplate, and is it necessary and appropriate, or does it cause any problems whatsoever?
Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to?
Well, since I just saw it today, you better answer it.
So the language that where the rubber really hits the road with it is, you can see in the first full paragraph, prepare development fee schedule and supporting analysis with reports summarizing cost methodologies, conclusions, the revenue projections for the town's water and sewer system. See Appendix 2 for detailed scope. So that's what they are committing to us in writing as far as the task that we're going to be paying for.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you disagree with those items, then I think that's really where we need to focus.
Don't.
Okay.
Not at all. And then I just this
I
stuff that seemed to be out of left field.
I agree. There should be probably some fine tuning of language in here.
But I think they're qualified, and I know the task that we want them to do. I just didn't want some of this language that doesn't seem germane to the task to somehow get in the way of the task. You know?
If they don't do what they say they're going to do in those two areas that I pointed out, then we have a contractual issue with it.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Bette Wilson Fulton. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Ryan Grusbeck has updates for us.
Well, I'll keep these largely brief. Upcoming meetings again, Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, that's the countywide meeting. The next one is on April 5th. April 5th. Yeah, they had that on April 1st, but that's, I think, yeah. No April Fools. It's legislative breakfast. The mayor and I are going to that, and actually we probably need to reconnoiter real quick on that, maybe tomorrow morning, if possible.
I have bullet points to get to you.
Super. That's great. And then a special assessment district workshop, just pointing out that we've tried to schedule that for 6 p.m. on March 26th. And that's with the county manager. I won't go into word-for-word detail on the items that I've outlined here, except to maybe go off the script just briefly to mention a couple of other issues. Would like to meet with, be planning on meeting actually with Ted Cole from Davenport in the next week and a half or so. So if anybody is interested in that, let me know. I think that would be a good place to, start really picking up that discussion again. I know the board was concerned about hearing more input from Davenport on the financial guarantee issue with the forced name financing, and so I'll be putting that together and sending something out to you soon on that. Town engineer applications are due March 29th. Commissioner Fiocco, skipping around a little bit on my notes here, Commissioner Fiocco mentioned with regards to Small Town Main Street meeting last week, I did have the pleasure of meeting Steve, I can't pronounce his last name, Shirkus, who is now the treasurer, and so I think I mentioned briefly in a previous update that we would be looking at an agreement, some sort of financial my brain is getting fried at this time of night.
And we're in the public understanding.
We need to review an agreement which essentially allows the town to disperse monies to Main Street. And we've discussed this off and on over the last year or so, and we've been working on some language and some MOU language on that. I'd like to review that real quick with Mr. Messick. I think we finally got that in place, as well as just kind of establishing a protocol between their treasurer and our finance director to make sure that that we're very clear on how that happens on a yearly basis, and also setting up the need for regular reports to you, the board, from Main Street, as well as auditing requirements and so forth. So more to come on that. As also our, and not to pick on Michael more than we already have tonight, but Commissioner Fiocco had pointed out to me a little while ago that the acorn, what he calls the acorn lights, the neo-traditional lights that are in the downtown that are not the lights in the trees. Okay, if you know what those are. There's the block that's nearest the courthouse. Those lights are out. We don't know why they're out. We're trying to work with Duke Energy on that issue. Hopefully we'll have an answer and a solution shortly, but in case you hear that from the public, we are aware that they're out, and it's a little bit darker on that side of the street. Luckily, we have the tree lights. Yeah. So otherwise it would be kind of dark over there. So.
And I didn't mention it, but it's the west side. So opposite.
Sorry.
Burley's.
Burley's is still in the light.
Okay. I don't know. I'm dozing off pretty quick.
I'll end it with that.
Excellent.
Thank you, Mr. Drusbeck. Regarding the county water and sewer master plan, I would greatly appreciate you sending the specifications for that.
I can send you and the board the RFQ for that.
Great.
We have not secured the contract for that yet. But we did have a meeting, as I mentioned, last week to kind of get the parameters of it. I think you're going to be pleased, at least with the direction that it's taking. There's a lot more work, though, that has to be done.
Okay. Well, before Jay Farrell falls asleep, we'll ask him to state any commissioner concerns.
Oh, here we go. No, I just have one thing. I got a call from the folks over there at East Cornwallis. We're going to know about the paving in East Cornwallis.
That's right. We got to look at a couple options on that. I've spoken with DOT on how we can go about that, and I think it's about time to get that in front of you guys as far as what direction you want to take with it, because that again it's DOT.
Right.
They've had the issue come up apparently in speaking with DOT in previous years with paving it. In order to pave it, it would require going out more than its existing width. It would take up more of a footprint, so to speak, more of the width that it currently has right now. And so I guess there was a little bit of the feedback that they got at the time was something that they didn't want to tackle taking out. There's some concrete mail box element on one part, and there's some lights somewhere else, and so there's some private issues, public-private issues that was kind of scaring DOT away from that. So what they had suggested is if the town is willing to take on that, take control of that stretch of currently state-maintained road. In other words, if they turn control of maintenance of that over to us, then we can go ahead and pave it. But that would be number one. That would be at our expense. And then
To pave it.
To pave it, yeah. And then number two, that would be kind of extending another service in front of some properties that, if you recall, that kind of jigsaws the town boundary, kind of jigsaws around some of those properties. I can bring that up when we go over it. But so we gotta kind of in our minds resolve that issue of, we're extending this town street by not town property, if that makes any sense. So So yeah, we can put those options up in front of you and, you know, decide what you want to do, but it's going to be, to get DOT to pave it, it doesn't sound like that's going to happen in the way that maybe a lot of residents want it to happen. It may be a similar path if we really want it paved. It may be a simpler path to have the town pave it if you want to go in that direction. So just something to think about. We can talk a little bit more about it.
Don't we have some monies for street paving, or is that street repair?
Well, yeah, that would be, we have Powellville money, and that's how I would recommend, if we got to that point, that's how I would recommend that we would pave it. It's probably going to be more than what we have in Powellville, but we can't, to pave it while it's being controlled by DOT, it would have to be paved to a DOT spec, which is taking on a wider path than what is currently there, and I think what people would prefer in that area. If we want to keep it on the narrower street path, it's my understanding that we could do that, but we would have to have control over it. We would have to have DOT give control over that street to us. So we can't just give DOT money and have them pave it, because then they would have to pave it to their specs, and they're saying that they can't do that. They can't, the way it's currently set up and the way that they've costed out and have eyeballed it before, they can't quite pull it off that way, so we would have to do it.
This is sounding familiar.
And we've talked a little bit about it in the past.
I think we've talked about it before. Is this something that we want to put forward a direction, Mr. Farrell, in terms
I would really like to see
exploring
something
what are the costs and
because it
implications?
has been on the radar for several years.
So do we want to ask for precise numbers and details on what it would cost for us to take it over?
The key to it is you can't build a street out of town, and until those people are willing to voluntarily be annexed, you don't have any authority to build a street, to pave it, to take it over, or anything else. So it's up to those folks to be willing to be part of the town, and then you can decide whether you want to do it or not.
You would be connecting, you would be going from one part of town. I mean, you could justify this.
Even if the DOT turned the road over to the town?
You don't have any authority to build roads outside of town.
It's part of its, I mean, you would start from in town, you would end up in town. I think you're kind of...
It's a hole in the donut that's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you can connect the dots on that, but I mean, if you want to look at it more, we can look at it more. But
should we put it on the agenda for next time?
I'm not going to have any numbers for you for next time. I mean, I'm just not. It's not enough time to get this stuff around.
What now?
We can get it on one of the upcoming agendas. It might be a little bit tough in the next week and a half to put everything, together with any kind of accuracy on that. So.
Could we couple it with? I've always been concerned about the fact that we do have several donut holes in our jurisdiction, and I'm not quite sure why we have them, and I'm not comfortable with the fact that they're there. Maybe we could couple that in and talk about those. Could we?
It might detract from the immediate goal of getting an answer on paving for East Cornwallis, but I very much agree with you. Those are concerns.
Not sure what we can do about that. We can't involuntarily.
No, I know we can't. Yeah. Okay, well, then let's just put it on the agenda for whenever you have the figures. How about that? Does that help, Jay?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. I'll pass that word on.
Okay. Bet?
Do you have anything? Oh, other than you guys gave me for alternative email addresses because mine's not working. No, I've contacted Mr. Grubeck about setting that up again in the meantime.
Michael?
Yep. So was wandering around Town Hall, the new Town Hall site the other night, and noticed we could get a lot more parking there. And I think we had a striping plan that utilized more of the parking lot, and I'd love to see us, we could probably get another 15 designated parking spaces out there.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad idea. Of course, the tenant just recently moved out, so we don't really have that responsibility anymore. So I think we could take a look at.
I think we can load it up.
Right.
There's a lot of traffic coming in at Crystal Fish.
There, yes.
I looked down that road the other night and it was jam-packed.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people are taking advantage of that parking lot.
Right.
Yeah.
First Sunday.
Yeah.
It's great too, it's free.
So that's one item, and so we set a public hearing tonight, and I think what we'll end up doing is 2 weeks from now we'll get this slug of information that we'll spend our weekends trying to figure out. And I know that because I did it this weekend with the MUPD. So I didn't have any of that information for the public hearing. And what I'd like to recommend as a policy for us is that the meeting at which we set the public hearing is the meeting at which we get the packet.
I agree.
That will just give us more time to deal with it. And obviously, if we're setting the public hearing, the materials are done, staff is satisfied that it's ready to go to the public hearing. So that's what I'd like to do. Make my life a lot easier, and I'm looking for ways to do that these days.
Especially the public, because it gives
well, they will get it as well.
information available to them about the issue.
Right. So if we could adopt that policy, I would certainly appreciate that. And the other question, I think we got a grant for these Fitbits, and it said there were 2 challenges. I'm curious, what are those challenges?
The first one is.
We need a Fitbit.
Well, you don't have insurance with us. So.
We have insurance.
Can we get insurance?
You know what? If you have a Fitbit, you can join our group. How about that? More the merrier. No, we have the first one coming up on the 18th. It starts on the 18th, and it lasts for 2 weeks. And it's number of steps. It's not real complicated. The second one, I think, is minutes of activity. So I could be wrong with that, but I'm just focusing in on at least trying to stay close with Delaney and Heather, who are by far and away the top 2 so far. So we haven't even started yet, but we've got the group. The group numbers show up online on the dashboard. It's pretty impressive. So.
Good luck.
Yeah, Alice is up there too. She has one, and I've got 2 of them going, but this is the one for Tom.
Can't double dip.
Well, no, this is from Brian's general fund.
No, I meant add your steps together.
Oh no, this one is actually more.
Where's yours? Let's see what on your is.
Yeah, mine's still in the box. I hadn't broke it out and played with it yet. It didn't start till Monday, so I got a week.
Emma?
I like my Fitbit.
You can have mine. How about that? That was. I'm sorry. Just one thing. Just to be clear, I apologize, John. Just to be clear, that was money that we received as a grant from the insurance. It's not anything else.
Nice.
Anyway, sorry.
Back to paving. Are we hearing anything about paving? What's it called? Not Industrial Drive. Lorax Lane.
No.
I mean, do we know where that stands? Is that in their court? Is it in the
I've never really heard who owns what through there. So
Lorax Lane is not public.
My concern is paving street that's not town street.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
they've never really, either Lyle or anybody else, has really given me an answer on who owns that. I'm afraid that they don't actually own it, that someone else owns it.
Mm-hmm.
So we can pave up to. We can pave up to where I read the town limit as being, and what street that we have. And I have an RFQ for that, but I was kind of hoping to get some resolution on who owns Lorax Lane or whatever they're calling it, and I haven't. So,
Okay.
and they'll claim, I don't know what they claim. I mean, I think they've been using it, and that may have some value there, but it could be theirs or it could be the actual neighboring property owners. Either way, I'm not going to pave something that's not town street.
Okay. Thank you. And Mr. Jones, I think we were working on a kind of a short-term urgent fix to downtown zoning and concerns that were
Main Street.
So is that the path? I thought that you were working on a language, some text that would...
Oh, that would just be a special use. We could work on that. Let's see what Main Street folks put together. But we made pretty good progress.
Last Thursday, we developed a purpose statement. And I'll send it to you.
That'd be great.
And see what our objective is. And now that we've got that purpose statement, then any regulation or any thinking on it, if it doesn't meet this criteria, it's not included. That's the basis upon which you can judge whether we're fulfilling the regulation. And I think it turned out really well. Jeff has seen it. He thought it was pretty good. I like it.
Okay. Is that going to take the place of, or would... Because I thought that we had a pretty strong consensus in support of the suggestion you made to have, as an interim period, things are...
But there's no immediate development that's going to be affected by that. So we passed it tonight. There's nothing on the horizon other than Town Hall, actually, but it is downtown.
And unlikely surprises if somebody just shows up on your doorstep or something.
They can't show up on my doorstep. They have to do pre-submittal meetings and meetings before meetings. Where I want it to. So, yes, John, we're working on that. Victoria's working on it. Main Street folks are working on it. I thought there was something on the horizon that it needs to be addressed.
Okay.
It would be for that next meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So would there be a motion to go into closed session so that the board can consult with the town attorney?
Motion.
Let's clear the room and then
Take a break?
And take a break, okay?
In the closed today?
I don't care.
Good.
We have to make a motion to take a break.
Motion.
Say so. Okay.
Yeah, I'm all in favor.
Appreciate it. Hey, Robert.